Chapter 499. This humble one is doing very well. Lei Chuxing finally regained some clarity after hearing the old eunuch's call. However, he felt an inexplicable sadness in his heart. No matter how he viewed himself, the current rotten situation had become a mess that was difficult for him to clean up. This was especially true after Lin Yuan revealed his ambitions. Lei Chuxing was in a state of panic and had taken many remedial measures. However, the more he did, the more mistakes he made, which led to the current situation. Even though Lei Chuxing knew that as long as he had enough time to deal with the south, even if Lin Yuan completely took over the north, he would still have the strength to fight. However, the enormous pressure that had been accumulating in his heart day after day made Lei Chuxing, blinded by greed, choose to open the border. He gritted his teeth and let the Frost Mirror barbarian into the country, but he didn't expect that he would shoot himself in the foot. His originally resentful attitude completely changed after hearing the news of the southern evil cultists. He originally only treated Lin Yuan as an equal opponent, but he didn't expect that Lin Yuan's plans were even greater than his. The cultists had even bypassed him and directly contacted the most powerful forces. If the shadow had not happened to be in the south, it was likely that the cultists would have caused a huge ruckus before the report would appear on the shadow's desk. Because at this moment, Lei Chuxing clearly understood that it wasn't just Lin Yuan. Even the civil and military officials of the court, as well as the top-level factions, all thought of him as the loser before the war even began. None of you are optimistic about this humble one's chances. This humble one is going to win this war no matter what. Lei Chuxing suddenly took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Eunuch Zhua, this humble one doesn't have any trustworthy people by his side right now. I can only trouble the servants' administration to make a trip to the northern border. Have the troops there withdraw in batches to the central plains and defend the imperial capital to the death. Without this humble one's orders, no one is allowed to fight on their own. Those who disobey will have their entire family executed." The old eunuch called Eunuch Zhua was shaken. He looked at Lei Chuxing in disbelief, as if this was the first time he had met this person. "I am very clear-headed now. I know the consequences of doing so." Lei Chuxing gritted his teeth and fiercely said, "Didn't they look down on me? They want this humble one's beautiful country, but this humble one will not give it to them. Even if they are lucky enough to beat this humble one this time, this humble one will leave them with a terrible mess." "Yes." Eunuch Zhua lowered his head again and pressed his forehead against the ground, trying to control his emotions. He wasn't sure what Lei Chuxing was feeling right now, but he was sure that Lei Chuxing wasn't clear-headed at the moment. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such a decision that harmed others without benefiting himself. He wouldn't have chosen to give up on all his plans at this time. However, Eunuch Zhua did not have Eunuch Tai's cultivation, nor did he have Zhang Xiu's forbearance, nor did he have Li Zhong's wisdom. He was just a loyal official, a foolish loyal official. Thus, even though he knew that Lei Chuxing's decision was wrong, Eunuch Zhua did not speak up to dissuade him. On the Frost Mirror grassland far away from the Shenwu dynasty, in the royal tent of the Shuliao tribe, a man who seemed to be in his 30s was holding a book in his left hand and a white stone in his right. His brows were furrowed as he sat in the tent in deep thought. But he was the only person in the tent. No one knew who he was playing Go with, or what he was thinking about. The man's skin was white and delicate, as smooth as milk. He didn't seem like a child of the grassland who had been tempered by the sun and wind day and night. Instead, he seemed like one of those scholarly Confucian disciples from the south of the Shenwu dynasty. He even wore a moon-white brocade robe, the style of which had been popular in the Shenwu dynasty last year. However, the material used was even more luxurious and expensive than the vast majority of high-class cloth shops. One could tell at a glance that it was no ordinary item. Even more inconceivable was that the book in the man's hand was not some incomprehensible Go manual, nor was it a Confucian classic. Instead, it was a book that could be seen everywhere on the northern frontier and that no one dared to disobey, the new laws of the northern frontier. Third Prince, the Blood Eagle has sent back a message. A Frost Mirror barbarian wearing a leather coat and iron armor placed a stack of parchment in front of the man. Without waiting for him to speak, the Frost Mirror barbarian cupped his fists and left the tent. The man acted as if he hadn't heard anything. His brows were still furrowed as he pondered for an incense stick's worth of time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he gently placed the white stone in his hand on the chessboard. The entire chessboard instantly came to life. The white stone that had been in a disadvantageous position suddenly twisted and turned into a killing move. At this point, the man finally put down the book in his hand. He stood up and walked to a copper basin to wash his hands with water. Then, he used a piece of dry animal skin to wipe the water off his hands. Only then did he return to his soft couch and sit down. He picked up the stack of parchment and began to read. It wasn't until he finished reading the last parchment that the man slowly exhaled and murmured, "He's gone mad." The Blood Eagle was an intelligence agency that he had set up himself. However, Frost Mirror Barbarian wasn't good at intelligence. Even if he disguised himself, his skin and demeanor were completely different from those who lived in a world where birds sang and flowers bloomed. Therefore, there were very few secret agents and spies in the Shuangjin dynasty. Even if there were a few similar organizations, they were short-lived. They were either destroyed in an instant or slowly fell into a useless state. Even though his Blood Eagle could hide in the Shinwu dynasty, it still couldn't obtain first-hand information. This was also the reason why he could slowly think of a way to solve the chessboard after receiving the information about the Shinwu dynasty. However, based on this outdated information, he could draw several conclusions. Firstly, his valiant 13th brother was already confirmed dead. Second, the strength of the northern frontier was far beyond their imagination. It was estimated that none of the people who entered the north this time could come out. Third, Lei Qiuxing had gone mad. The first two pieces of information were already speculated by him. Even if they were confirmed now, they weren't worth mentioning. However, the last piece of information made him cautious. In addition to the information he received this morning, Lei Qiuxing was going to withdraw the border army in the north and let them directly enter the rich and livable hinterland of the Shinwu dynasty to occupy territory and plunder treasures. In other words, Lei Qiuxing was going to use the entire Shuangjin dynasty as a knife and let them be the executioners whose hands were stained with blood. For Lei Qiuxing would get rid of all the major problems and directly reshuffle the power structure of the entire Shinwu dynasty. But what if he's not mad? The third prince's eyebrows, which had just relaxed, were tightly knitted together again. His expression was a little uncertain. He dared to use the Shuangjin dynasty as a knife. Wasn't he afraid that it was easier to invite the devil than to send the devil away? Chapter 500. The third prince sat in his own tent and frowned as he pondered. After a while, he realized that something was not right. How did Lei Qiuxing end up like this? It was because the Qingjiang Empire and Shuangjin Empire had joined forces with the Hingduan Mountains and the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas to attack the Shinwu dynasty at the same time. As a result, even the basic garrison troops were transferred to the front line. Although the front line looked stable, the interior was as soft as mud. Not to mention the northern frontier king and the Qingping king, even the rebels could threaten Lei Qiuxing's position. However, why would the four forces join forces to attack the Shinwu dynasty? With the third prince's wisdom that did not match that of the people in the grassland, he quickly thought of the top forces that were above the empire. It was obvious that Lei Qiuxing had offended one of the top forces because of something. That was why there was a war everywhere, giving the aristocratic families and sects who coveted the high position space to cause trouble. After joining forces with Lei Qiuxing, the situation gradually became clear. The thing that made the top forces hate the Shinwu dynasty so much that they used all their influence to make the four forces join forces should still be in Lei Qiuxing's hands. Otherwise, both the Shuangjin Empire and the Qingjiang Empire would have withdrawn their troops and returned to the empire. After all, the monster horde in the Hingduan Mountains would not reason with them. Since they had no military strength, the neighboring empires would not miss this opportunity to loot a burning house. However, the strange thing was that the forces that bordered the Qingjiang Empire and the Shuangjin Empire did not attack them at all. It was only after they attacked the northern frontier that the monster horde broke out on the Shuangjin grassland again. All the signs pointed to the fact that the item was still in Lei Qiuxing's hands. Also, the reason why he dared to take the risk was that the item could help him turn the tables after his plan of driving the wolves to devour the tigers. He could destroy the Frost Mirror cavalry that invaded the Shenwu dynasty. Thinking of this, the third prince's forehead was instantly covered in a fine layer of cold sweat. Shakily standing up from his soft couch, the third prince walked step by step towards the door of the tent. This was not because his body was weak. On the contrary, the fact that he was able to maintain his fair and smooth skin on the Frost Mirror grassland was not because he was talented. Rather, it was because the third prince had cultivated at a terrifying speed since he was a child. He was only in his 30s, but he had already reached the Heaven Star realm. With his stellar energy protecting his body, he was naturally impervious to the cold wind. Although they only had the title of a guard, their status was not inferior to the generals other than the princes. As long as they reported to the Great Khan, they would be able to see him. Also, the third prince turned to look in the direction of the Shenwu dynasty and said with a dark face, "We have to be prepared for both sides. My father has always favored the 13th prince, but it seems that he has died on the northern frontier. I am worried that my father will send troops out in anger and destroy all the tribes on the Frost Mirror grassland. Find a group of trustworthy people and inform the chiefs of the other tribes to come here for a meeting. Even if we have to force him, we cannot let my father continue this war." The guard trembled and his face paled, but his eyes flashed with determination. He said in a low voice, "Yes." Everyone knew that Shuangjin Khan favored the 13th prince. However, they were both Shuangjin Khan's sons. How could the third prince, who was the most talented and the wisest, not be interested in Shuangjin Khan's throne? If he succeeded in forcing the third prince to abdicate this time, he would have succeeded the third prince. As long as he could win this war, he would be a big shot in the Bloodspan tribe and even in the Shuangjin dynasty. When the time came, the third prince might even allow him to leave with his tribesmen and establish his own tribe. For a better life in the future, for a lord who could rule over a region. It was a gamble. The third prince, who did not know the guard's complicated thoughts, sighed as he watched the guard leave. He looked in the direction of the Shenwu dynasty and murmured, "I hope it is not too late." Chapter 501. If the Shuangjin dynasty could get their hands on information, the northern frontier would naturally be able to get their hands on it. In fact, they would be able to get their hands on it much faster. Looking at the report on the table that had been confirmed by the Association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard, Li Zhong's eyes were filled with doubt. Was Lei Qiuxing crazy, or was he making a huge gamble? Or was he trying to drag the northern frontier down with him? Li Zhong believed that a person at Lei Qiuxing's level wouldn't lose their will to fight just because of a momentary loss. He also didn't believe that Lei Qiuxing would make such a crazy decision. If that was the case, then he would have to wonder if the person who had invaded the country with a strong army was the current divine martial emperor Lei Qiuxing. Once the northern frontier army retreats back to the central plains, the Frost Mirror cavalry will be able to attack the Shenwu dynasty unscrupulously. Of course, they might also attack our northern frontier. Judging from the factors of this simultaneous invasion, the Shuangjin dynasty's tribes, big and small, should be more inclined to plunder the Shenwu dynasty, which is currently lacking in battle strength. However, the disappearance of the 13th prince will cause the Frost Mirror Khan to target the northern frontier. Lei Qiuxing's seemingly crazy move has hit the nail on the head. If we go to stop the Shuangjin dynasty, we will have to split off our already small forces to take over the defense line left behind by the Shinwu dynasty's frontier army. Not only will it be a waste of effort, but it will also be easy for Lei Qiusheng to attack us. However, if we don't stop the Shuangjin dynasty, we will have to face the most elite Shui Liao cavalry. Without the Shui Liao knights who could contend against the divine marshal Chongbu, with the strength of the Shinwu dynasty's border army and Lei Qiusheng's plans, it would be more than enough to defeat the Shuangjin dynasty's invasion. When the time came, Lei Qiusheng would be able to reverse his decline and rebuild the morale of the army. Then, he would be able to find an opportunity to fight us head-on. Right now, the northern frontier's strength is barely enough to deal with Lei Qiusheng, who has recovered 50% of his strength. Add to that the Blood Liao Knights attack, and we can't mobilize more than 30% of our troops. Unless Uncle Gao's defensive fortifications along the river are miraculous, Lei Qiusheng will be able to catch his breath and kill us with a single punch. Li Zhong muttered to himself. His eyes gradually regained their clarity. He said coldly, "What a Lei Qiusheng." Everyone's wisdom was different, and the level at which they looked at problems was also different. Eunuch Zhuo was on the first level, and he could only see the harm of Lei Qiusheng's move. The third prince was on the second level, and he could see the harm of Lei Qiusheng's move. He could also see the benefits from it and derive a series of calculations. Li Zhong was on the third level, and he directly eliminated the areas that were harmful to the Shinwu dynasty. He found the most crucial point and even used it to deduce the unfavorable situation the northern frontier would soon face. As for which level Lei Qiusheng was on, perhaps only he himself knew. When an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Lei Qiusheng had chosen between the north and the south to survive. On one hand, he catered to the north to force the south, but on the other hand, he was worried that the north would become too powerful and difficult to control in the future. Under this kind of worrying situation, no matter how good a card he played, it would be a lousy one. It would be very easy for Li Zhong, Lin Yuan, and other people with great wisdom to find the flaws, and then break his killing moves one by one and counterattack. Even at this point, not only had Lei Qiusheng not solved the trouble in the south, he had not even mobilized Lei Qiusheng and the rebel army in the south. If not for Lin Yuan's tit-for-tat by letting the cultists land in the south, perhaps the south would still be stable and waiting for Lei Qiusheng to be forced into a corner by the northern frontier. At that time, no matter what conditions the aristocratic families in the south offered, Lei Qiusheng would have to pinch his nose and accept them, and the scales of victory would begin to tilt towards the interest groups in the south. At that point, whether it was Lei Qiusheng or Lin Yuan, they would both become losers. It was just a matter of who would lose more in the end. But at the moment when he was completely on the verge of defeat, Lei Qiusheng was able to sweep away all his worries and boldly adopt the method of no construction without destruction to meet the attack of the northern frontier. Moreover, he changed his previous scheming attitude and chose to use an open and above-board scheme. He made the Shuangjin dynasty his butcher's knife. While suppressing the northern frontier and sweeping away the aristocratic families in the central plains, he concentrated his forces to defend the imperial city and the nearby territories. With the Shuangjin barbarians' fighting style of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, he was bound to bypass the imperial city, which was a fat piece of meat, and directly sweep through the territory of the interest groups in the south. The cultists, the Frost Mirror Barbarian, and the interest groups in the south would first fight each other, and then Lei Qiusheng would suddenly close the door and beat the dogs, directly eliminating all the internal problems. Even the aristocratic families that gave him a headache were swept away by the Shuangjin Barbarian. How many of them would be left unharmed? How many of them would dare to challenge Lei Qiusheng? How could he count on the aristocratic families near the imperial city that Lei Qiusheng was toying with? Moreover, the Shuangjin barbarian would not continue to attack the Shinwu dynasty. Instead, they would retreat to the Frost Mirror grasslands to lick their wounds. At that time, if the northern frontier still could not deal with the problem of the Blood Liao Knights, it would be a huge joke. Should he take this move or not? For the first time, Li Zhong felt that the wisdom he was so proud of was actually useless at this moment. He realized that compared to ambitious and ruthless characters like Lei Qiuxing and Lin Yuan, he lacked the most crucial thing, courage. He did not want to waste his energy fighting the Shuangjin dynasty, but he also did not want to take the risk of Lei Qiuxing rebuilding his confidence. At this moment, he did not know what to do. Your Highness, battle report. A guard strode into Li Zhong's office and placed a battle report on Li Zhong's desk. Li Zhong tore open the wax seal on the envelope and took out the letter. His face immediately turned ashen as if he had eaten a fly. While he was still making preparations, Lei Qiuxing had already begun to move. At present, most of the northern border army had been wiped out, and the rest were fighting as they retreated toward the central plains. After all, these border armies had been stationed at the border for many years and had encountered the barbarians of the Shuangjin dynasty more than once or twice in the wilderness. While they might not be evenly matched, they would not be routed so quickly. This is troublesome. This is really troublesome. Li Zhong felt his temples throbbing with pain. Lei Qiuxing had actually played a dirty trick right in front of them. According to Li Zhong's usual logic, Lei Qiuxing's orders would be delivered to the border by trusted officials, and then the border army commanders would have to verify the authenticity of the orders before destroying the fortifications and slowly retreating to the vicinity of the imperial capital. But just as he received news that Lei Qiuxing was cutting off all means of retreat, the border army had already moved. What did this mean? It meant that Lei Qiuxing had given the Northern Frontier Intelligence Agency a vicious slap to the face. Chapter 502. Lei Qiuxing's order had already bypassed the intelligence system of the Northern Frontier and reached the border army. He pretended to be in the servants' administration just to confuse the intelligence agency of the Northern Frontier. He wanted Li Zhong and the others to think about it for a while when they received the message. Then he would take advantage of the time to mobilize the border army. In this way, no matter how fast the Northern Frontier's response was, it would be a joke. Because the border army had started to retreat in an orderly manner. Could the Northern Frontier attack the border army under the pressure of the Shuangjin barbarian and cut off their retreat? If the Northern Frontier really had that kind of strength, how could they be forced to this step? At the same time, it was also a challenge. How many troops do we have left? Li Zhong looked up at the guard who didn't have time to retreat, looking very gloomy. The guard thought for a while and said bitterly, "The main force of the southern expedition is in the border army to carry out the plan of the Great Wall. Some of them are in the north to clean up the rebels or to entangle the Frost Mirror barbarian who got separated from the main force. The Falling Star Army is now surveying the terrain near Wei River City, preparing to build a position to resist the naval attack of the Shenwu dynasty. The Subhuman Army is fighting with the demon beasts, so some of them are scattered in the forests. It's hard to gather them in a short time. If Your Highness wants to mobilize the troops as soon as possible, only the Northern Army hasn't been mobilized yet." Li Zhong was now a criminal. Without Lin Yuan's permission, the 100,000 guards of the prince's mansion were not allowed to leave Shunning City. They had already made a mistake once. If they made another mistake, no matter how good Li Zhong's reputation was, no one would be able to keep his head. Luckily, the Northern Army in the Northern Frontier could be mobilized though the guards couldn't be mobilized. Li Zhong thought for a while and scolded with a smile, "Mobilize the Northern Army? Then it's better not to do anything." The Northern Battlefront Army, which had just been expanded twice, was disbanded recently. Those experienced soldiers were all sent to the front line. Even the soldiers we lost in the rebellion of the 3 cities were sent from the Northern Battlefront Army. Do you think they still have people? Well, the guard touched his head and smiled. Even so, they are one of the 3 armies in the Northern Frontier. They can spare 100,000 soldiers, can't they? Your Highness, you think too much. He could tell that this prince didn't care about his own life at all. He knew that this was a job that would cost him his head, but he still wanted to take the 100,000 guards out and wrestle with the border troops of the Shinwu dynasty who had retreated back to the Central Plains. Li Zhong shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. The Northern Army can't even gather 600,000 soldiers, and they have to be stationed in different places in the northern frontier. It's a chaotic time. Who knows how many demons and monsters are going to cause trouble? Almost all the bright gown guards are going to fight with the army. The local troops and the Association of Demon Kings can't suppress the northern frontier. Besides, Li Zhong stopped abruptly. He waved his hand and said, "Anyway, the Northern Army can't be mobilized. Within 4 hours, you have to bring me at least 100,000 soldiers. Otherwise, the guards of the royal palace will go out to fight. Even if we can't kill all the border army of the Shinwu dynasty, we have to try our best to wipe them out." As soon as he finished speaking, Li Zhong's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. Some words couldn't be heard by a mere guard. The northern frontier wasn't a paradise where everyone was united. There was a lot of blood hidden under the peaceful land. Various factions wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to fight for enough benefits for themselves. Although they had all given up on the position of the actual ruler under Lin Yuan, this did not mean that they were pure of heart and did not care about anything. It was like the aristocratic families that depended on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to survive. How could the Qiao family and the Shui family be compared with the other aristocratic families? Although the forces that depended on the northern frontier were controlled by the factions and wouldn't think about being the leader, they would take this opportunity to suppress and scheme against each other because of their irreconcilable hatred. Even if they were punished afterwards, they would still do it. These actions were the same as the forces that rebelled in the Shinwu dynasty. It was just that they didn't have the resources and strength to stand on their own in the northern frontier. They could only drag down the forces of the other factions and try their best to eliminate more forces to increase their own speaking rights. Usually, the northern frontier looked peaceful on the surface. However, at this critical moment, no one could be sure whether they were loyal or not. Li Zhong didn't know who he could trust. He could only let them work together according to their original factions and try his best to avoid infighting. However, there were some ticking time bombs that he had to guard against. For example, Zhang Qilin. The guard had a bitter expression on his face. He could only helplessly accept this task before turning around and leaving the office. He didn't have as many misgivings as Li Zhong. Naturally, he didn't have as many worries as Li Zhong. However, Li Zhong was now their master. Once Li Zhong fell from power, they could forget about having good days in the future. I really envy you guys. You don't have to think so much. Li Zhong looked at the guard who was gradually walking away and shook his head with a bitter smile. However, a moment later, Li Zhong's face returned to its cold and indifferent expression. However, a trace of madness appeared in his eyes. "Didn't you, Lei Qiuxing, want to play an open scheme with us and turn the area around the imperial capital into a place where anyone who touches you will have to stab their hands with blood? This old man doesn't believe in this evil. While you're organizing a defensive position, this old man will do his best to eliminate the effective forces in your hands and let those Shuangjin barbarian people bleed first. Let's see if you can still sit still on the fishing platform." Li Zhong's strategy wasn't weak. However, he didn't have Lei Qiuxing's boldness. However, this didn't matter. Even a rabbit would bite when cornered. If he couldn't find a way to deal with Lei Qiuxing's open scheme with his own courage, then he might as well give up on his reasoning and use an absolutely bold and crazy strategy. In any case, Lei Qiuxing dared to act as if he was going to drag the northern frontier down with him. How could the northern frontier not dare to accept this? However, on the surface, Lei Qiuxing wanted to drag the northern frontier down with him. However, he still had a trump card in his hands. It didn't matter even if he didn't achieve the desired effect. In any case, Lei Qiuxing was extremely confident that he would still be the ruler of the Shinwu dynasty. He wouldn't become a speck of dust in the long river of history because of a small disturbance. However, Li Zhong's crazy response was just a risky move. To put it bluntly, it was just a bluff. In his heart, he really did have some thoughts of dragging Lei Chuxing down with him. Chapter 503. But it doesn't matter. After all, I still have the Dragon King behind me. The madness in Li Zhong's eyes gradually subsided. Lei Chuxing had some unknown trump cards in his hands, but how could Li Zhong not have any trump cards in his hands? The situation had already become so dangerous, but Lin Yuan didn't show any signs of panic. He didn't even have the intention to recall the army in the south back to the northern frontier to fight together. That must be because Lin Yuan still had other cards that he hadn't played yet. Li Zhong knew his position, so he also knew that no matter how much power Lin Yuan gave him, he was still a puppet. And no matter how much a puppet struggled, it was still within the scope of Lin Yuan's ability. As long as Li Zhong wasn't stupid enough to cancel Lin Yuan's original arrangements and order all the troops in the northern frontier to die, then Lin Yuan would still be able to clean up the situation. There was indeed only one ruler in the northern frontier, but Li Zhong, as the king of the northern frontier, still had a lot of power in his hands. In addition, Lin Yuan deliberately molded Li Zhong into a positive figure who always thought for the common people. Anything that was beneficial to the people in the northern frontier would be credited to Li Zhong. The dirty work was basically done by people like Luo Su, Shi Dong, and Xia Siyu. This was because Lin Yuan was very clear that the law of the jungle could be absolutely observed in the Hengduan Mountains. But outside the Hengduan Mountains, when dealing with these people, he had to consider everyone's feelings from all aspects. For example, those capable officials who had real talent, hated war, and could really bring benefits to a region would definitely not be willing to serve under a warmonger like Lin Yuan. After all, Lin Yuan's actions were completely different from the ideals they had molded since childhood. Naturally, they wouldn't favor him, but the development of the northern frontier couldn't be done without them. Therefore, Li Zhong appeared. With Li Zhong as the leader, it was a completely different matter. Not just the people on the northern frontier, even the arrogant sages of the Confucian sect mentioned the reforms on the northern frontier. Even though they knew that they were growing on the corpses of the noble families and sects, they did bring benefits to the people. They even removed the opportunity for the noble families and sects as middlemen to suck the wealth of the people. The people received benefits, and so did the income of the rulers. Therefore, no one could go against their conscience and say that the reform of the northern frontier was a strategy to bring chaos to the country. Even though they all knew that the reforms and laws at the northern frontier were all made by Lin Yuan, the exotic beast, they still couldn't believe it. However, since Lin Yuan wanted to give the credit to Li Zhong, these humans agreed to it. They were willing to be blind and not come out to refute. Naturally, there would be talented people who didn't see the twists and turns in the process who came to the northern frontier. Therefore, Li Zhong's position in the northern frontier was very special. Different from the previous two kings of the northern frontier, although Li Zhong didn't have his own faction, his orders carried much more weight than the previous two kings. This was because he was assigned for Lin Yuan to recruit talents. Even if Li Zhong wanted to die, Lin Yuan had to find a way to protect him. I hope you won't walk on that path of death. Li Zhong placed his hands behind his back and sighed faintly. The situation at the northern frontier was indeed complicated. However, Zhang Qilin and Shenlin Jun, who used to be reserve soldiers, were even more difficult to deal with. These people were 100% loyal to Lei Chuxing. When Luo Su was teaching Li Zhongxing, Lin Yuan promoted Zhang Qilin and let him lead those people to build the northern army. Therefore, Li Zhongxing was under the subtle influence. His loyalty to Lei Chuxing was no longer what it used to be. This time, Lei Chuxing's action of no building without destruction had greatly impacted Li Zhongxing, who had been nurtured in the northern frontier. Therefore, Li Zhongxing, who was far away in the front line, might not be absolutely loyal to Lin Yuan. However, when it came to protecting the people of the northern frontier, Li Zhongxing would spare no effort to complete it. Therefore, the Great Wall plan would never have any mistakes. However, Zhang Qilin, who had been hanging out with those old brothers, wasn't affected by this. These people still maintained absolute loyalty to Lei Qiuxing. Since Lei Qiuxing could bypass the intelligence agencies of the northern frontier and move the border army to retreat under their noses, then it was impossible for him not to bypass their spies and send the secret edict to Zhang Qilin. At this critical moment, it was better to be stabbed by someone from the inside than to fight against those barbarians of the Shuangjin dynasty. Li Zhongxing stayed in the northern frontier as a prisoner because he wanted to keep an eye on Zhang Qilin and those old subordinates of Li Zhongxing. However, now that Lei Qiuxing had taken such drastic measures, only an idiot would let those border army soldiers leave. However, if he moved, no one could guarantee that Zhang Qilin wouldn't act rashly. Before this, the northern frontier's troops were all sent from the northern battlefront army. Of course, it wasn't because the soldiers of the northern battlefront army were strong and had good training. It was because Lin Yuan didn't want Zhang Qilin and those reserve soldiers of Shen Lin Jun to make the northern battlefront army into a private army. That was why he wanted to use this method to scatter those officers of Shen Lin Jun's reserve soldiers into different troops so that they couldn't cooperate with each other. Two flowers bloomed, one on each side. Let's not talk about the scheming in the northern frontier for now. Li Zhongxing, who was near Donglin City, wasn't having a good time at the moment. Because of the Shenwu dynasty's border army's retreat, the original barrier naturally didn't exist anymore. Although the Shenwu dynasty's army wouldn't go deep into the northern frontier's territory, they wouldn't come near the border and cause trouble near Donglin City, which was heavily guarded. However, even if the Shenwu dynasty's army didn't come, it didn't mean that the Shuangjin dynasty's barbarians were so sensible. As soon as the border army retreated from the fortifications, the barbarians rushed in impatiently. After all, the border army had been ordered to defend the defensive line for the past few days. Not to mention supplies, even the scouts couldn't penetrate the defensive line. Therefore, the 1.2 million Frost Mirror barbarian from before had completely lost contact with them. Now that things had developed to this point, it wasn't just a matter of the missing 13th prince anymore. If the 150,000 Blood Gold Knights were wiped out here, even Frost Mirror Khan wouldn't be able to stop the decline of the Blood Gold tribe, let alone the 13th prince. If the 1.05 million cavalrymen were also lost, who knew how many tribes would be wiped out this winter? Because of this, the chiefs of the Shenwu dynasty's territory were extremely anxious. They repeatedly ordered the northern frontier to release these warriors even if they had to suffer some losses. Therefore, more and more Frost Mirror barbarian rushed into the Shenwu dynasty's territory like wolves and tigers, urgently wanting to get in touch with the vanguard troops. Chapter 504. Previously, Li Zhongxing had used a different strategy to eliminate the vanguard troops, so he could treat them as if they did not exist. But now that the Great Wall plan was halfway through, if he allowed this large wave of barbarians to pass through, the entire plan would become a joke. Moreover, even if these barbarians were not very smart, it was impossible for them to allow the northern territory to build a defensive fortification that could isolate them from their territory. Damn it, let's go all out. Li Zhongxing unsheathed the long sword at his waist and said fiercely, "Don't panic. Craftsmen, finish your work in an orderly manner. My men will escort you back to the safety of Donglin City in an orderly manner. Leave 5,000 men to guard the craftsmen. The rest of you, follow me and prepare to fight those barbarians." Almost all of the soldiers following Li Zhongxing were the elites of the southern expedition. Apart from the first batch he had brought out, the rest were all veterans who had participated in the encirclement and suppression of the rebel army in the north. Although the quality of their battle was not up to par, they had still been honed on the battlefield. These soldiers naturally exuded the aura of an invincible army. The Shuangjin barbarian army arrived in an instant, but they did not break through the enemy's formation and charge immediately. Instead, they set up camp 15 li away from Donglin City, seemingly intending to engage in a tug-of-war with Li Zhongxing's headquarters. This was the first time the two sides had met. Even the arrogant Shuangjin barbarian army did not dare to be careless at this moment. After all, the 13th prince, 200,000 Blood Ridge cavalrymen, and 450,000 cavalrymen from various tribes had all been lost in the north. Now that the brothers who had invaded the Central Plains had regained contact with them, those who had entered the northern territory were like clay oxen entering the sea. It was as if they had disappeared directly. Given the barbarians' character of bullying the weak and fearing the strong, even if they had not personally experienced the battle with the Northern Frontier Army, they would still realize that the so-called information about the Northern Frontier being weak was all fabricated by the Shinwu dynasty to deceive them. The one who was truly weak was the Shinwu dynasty. However, now that things had developed to this point, the Mirror Frost dynasty did not have the spare energy to cause trouble for the Shinwu dynasty for the time being. After all, their brothers, as well as the 13th prince, whom the Khan had placed all his hopes on, were all trapped in the north. If this matter was not handled properly, the Mirror Frost Khan would be enraged, and countless heads would roll. Both sides had merely set up a battle formation and were facing each other. Unexpectedly, neither side had any intention of taking the initiative to attack. The first day slowly passed by in this kind of stalemate between wanting to say something but hesitating to do so. It was not until noon of the second day that a rider came out of the Shuangjin dynasty's military tent, claiming to be the messenger of the Khan of Frost. Li Zhongxing's camp was built behind the cement wall. Because the fortification had just begun construction, even with the help of cement, it was impossible to complete it in a short period of time. Moreover, this fortification was only outside Donglin City and had not yet been connected to the planned cities. Naturally, the Shuangjin barbarian did not know that this was the wall of despair that they would encounter in the future. It was just a temporary fortification built by the Northern Frontier Army. The ranger in charge of guarding the place held the so-called messenger on the ground and carefully searched him. After making sure that he did not carry any weapons, he was escorted into the main camp to meet with Li Zhongxing. After entering the commander's tent, the messenger did not mock Li Zhongxing with a sneer on his face. Instead, he cupped his fist with a solemn face and said in a deep voice, "I am Enchanting, the young chief of the Green Carp tribe in the Frost Mirror grassland. Greetings to all the generals." The moment his voice fell, all the generals in the commander's tent looked at each other in dismay. Then, their eyes fell on Li Zhongxing's face at the same time. It was said that the Shuangjin barbarian was rude and unreasonable. But now, this messenger had changed his usual behavior. There must be something fishy going on. "I am Li Zhongxing, the commander of the southern expedition in the northern frontier." Li Zhongxing sat on the tiger-skin chair, looked down at Enchanting and said in a deep voice, "The Shuangjin dynasty started the war without declaring war. First, they attacked our northern frontier territory. Now that the army is here again, the young chief has changed his usual behavior. This is really confusing." Hearing this, Enchanting blushed. He cleared his throat and said, "There is something you don't know, Marshal Li. Our Shuangjin dynasty was deceived by a scoundrel. We didn't know that the northern frontier and the Shinwu dynasty had broken off relations. That's why we attacked the northern frontier territory. I'm sure you also know that our Shuangjin dynasty and the Shinwu dynasty have been at war for more than half a year. When we suddenly saw a hole in our border, we naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity." Enchanting's words weren't nonsense. After all, the northern frontier belonged to the Shinwu dynasty. Although the Frost Mirror barbarian clearly came for the northern frontier, they didn't penetrate the northern frontier, let alone enter the territory of the northern frontier. In addition, the Frost Mirror barbarian had come for the Central Plains. So, if they braced themselves and said that they came to attack the Shinwu dynasty, no one could say anything about it. Oh. Li Zhongxing suddenly understood and raised his head. He smiled and said, young chief means that you attacked the wrong people? Yes, that's what I meant. Keiting's face was still red, but it wasn't clear whether it was due to excitement or embarrassment. Li Zhongxing's face suddenly darkened. He said in a strange tone, young chief is so sure of this statement. Do you think that I and everyone else are fools? If our northern frontier army entered the Shuangjin dynasty and killed, and then we told you that we were actually going for the demon beasts in the Hengduan mountain range, would you believe us? As soon as he finished speaking, the generals in the tent suddenly burst into laughter. Keiting's face became even redder. After all, they had all watched the Shuangjin barbarian invade the north. They didn't even look at them, who were disguised as the Xinwu dynasty's troops, and directly rushed to the northern frontier. If the Shuangjin dynasty really came for the Xinwu dynasty, how could they let go of the cities and troops in the north? Donglin City was intact, and they were unharmed. This was a ruthless slap to the Shuangjin dynasty's face. This is not the same. Keiting's face alternated between green and red. He whispered, your northern frontier army can directly enter the Hengduan mountain range. Why do you need to use our frost mirror grassland? Li Zhongxing smiled and shook his head. He mocked, then why can't your frost mirror cavalry gather their forces and directly attack the central plains and take over the imperial capital? Why do you have to divide your forces to attack our northern frontier territory? You can divide your forces, but can't we? Keiting's chest rose and fell violently. He stared fiercely at Li Zhongxing, but he couldn't spit out a single word. In terms of sharp tongues, even 100 of him wouldn't be a match for these people. But now, he had to lower his head. Chapter 505. You're being bullied to this extent and you're still not angry. As Li Zhongxing mocked Kei Yan, his eyes flashed with a sharp light as he began to secretly plan. The Shuangjin dynasty hasn't changed much, but they also have experts on their side. They know that Lei Chixing wants to use them to clean up the families and sects of the Xinwu dynasty and suppress us at the same time. When the matter is almost done, Lei Chixing will make his move. At that time, those Shuangjin barbarian in the south of the Xinwu dynasty won't be able to come out. Therefore, they can only set their sights on the northern frontier, hoping to liberate their forces from our side and ensure that the Shuangjin dynasty won't be greatly damaged by Lei Chixing's scheme. After all, after this matter is over, many forces will want a share of the profits. Suddenly, Lin Yuan's voice interrupted Li Zhongxing's contemplation. Li Zhongxing looked around and didn't see any signs of Lin Yuan's existence. He then heard Lin Yuan say, I'm talking directly to you through my consciousness, so only you can hear my voice. You don't need to find out where I am. Just deal with the matter at hand and try to stall for time. Wait for our people to kill the Frost Mirror Barbarian in the northern frontier, but don't deliberately cause a conflict. With Lin Yuan's support, Li Zhongxing's thoughts inexplicably calmed down. Clearing his throat, Li Zhongxing said with a smile, young clan leader, you don't need to take it to heart. I'm just complaining. If it were you, young clan leader, you wouldn't easily swallow this resentment after being beaten up for no reason, right? Yes, I don't know what request Commander Li has. Please tell us. The Shuangjin dynasty will do our best to satisfy you. Seeing that Li Zhongxing was giving him a way out, even though Keiting had been humiliated to the point of wanting to die, he had no choice but to pinch his nose and agree. However, this time, Keiting emphasized the words reflection of the Frost dynasty. He wanted to remind Li Zhongxing that he was not alone. There were still millions of reflection of the Frost cavalry outside. If the two sides could not come to an agreement, they would have to fight. If the two of them had a normal conversation, Li Zhongxing might have to think twice before bargaining. However, with Lin Yuan's support, Li Zhongxing no longer had any desire to negotiate. This was because Lin Yuan never intended to give him any face from the beginning. In the end, they would still have to fight. After pondering for a moment, Li Zhongxing's lips curled up slightly. He smiled and said, "Young clan leader, you're too polite. I'm just a commander. Even if I want to negotiate, I'm not qualified. How about this? Young clan leader, go back and rest for 2 days. I'll quickly send a letter to the Northern Frontier Mansion and let the king of the Northern Frontier count the casualties before coming back to talk to young clan leader." Although Kai Yan was smiling, he was cursing in his heart. Of course, he knew that Li Zhongxing's rank wasn't high enough to negotiate with them. However, as one of the 3 commanders of the Northern Frontier, Li Zhongxing's words still carried a certain amount of weight on the Northern Frontier. More importantly, Li Zhongxing and his men were currently at the pass. As long as he didn't agree, his brothers trapped in the north wouldn't be able to come out. They wouldn't even be able to send in supplies. Who knew how many people would die in these 2 days? Licking his lips, Kai Yan asked tentatively, "Commander Li, I came here with sincerity. However, I don't see any sincerity from your side. How about you open a path and let the warriors of the Shuangjin dynasty who mistakenly entered the northern frontier return home?" Humph. Almost instantly, Li Zhongxing heard 2 cold snorts. One voice came from Lin Yuan, and the other voice came from a middle-aged scholar in a gray robe in the tent. The middle-aged scholar cupped his fists toward Li Zhongxing, then looked at Kai Yan with a gloomy face and said in a cold voice, "Warriors. Those barbarians may seem like warriors to you, but in the eyes of the northern frontier, they are complete sinners. This young master, your Shuangjin dynasty wantonly invaded our northern frontier, committing all kinds of crimes. Now that you see that the situation isn't right, you send someone over to say a few words and want us to let them go. Isn't the price of invading our northern frontier a little too low? You are." The corners of Kai Yan's mouth twitched as he gloomily stared at the middle-aged scholar. After all, Li Zhongxing's army was blocking the path that they had to pass through. No matter what, he was a mountain that could not be bypassed. The Shuangjin dynasty did not want to waste their military power in such a meaningless place, so they naturally had to say all they could. However, if it was someone else who came to talk to him, he would not be so good-tempered. If it were not for the fact that this middle-aged scholar was Li Zhongxing's subordinate, he would have already brandished his blade and cut him down. Chen family of Taizong, Chen Zifang. The middle-aged scholar coldly stared back at Kai Yan without the slightest hint of panic in his eyes. Chen Zifang was a traitor on the side of the aristocratic families during the rebellion of the 3 cities. He might not be first-rate in terms of cultivation or strategy, but his insight was unparalleled. From the moment the northern frontier prince's residents began to carry out military orders, he understood one thing: Lin Yuan had no intention of letting go of the Shuangjin dynasty's cavalry that had entered the northern frontier. In other words, Lin Yuan's original intention was to completely fall out with the Shuangjin dynasty. With such a style, either Lin Yuan was not worried about the Shuangjin dynasty's revenge, or he had something that could threaten the Shuangjin dynasty. Coupled with Li Zhongxing's current attitude, how could Chen Zifang, who had already seen through everything, not jump out and make his presence known in the eyes of the Dragon King? "Never heard of you. But then again, you don't have the right to talk to me." Kai Yan disdainfully shook his head and sneered, "Do you think that the Shuangjin dynasty is weak and easy to bully just because I say a few words? Do you really want us to break into this weak camp of yours and hold our swords to your necks before you're willing to talk?" The Shuangjin dynasty's soldiers were used to being rude. After Kai Yan finished speaking, he felt that he had finally vented the anger in his heart. Especially after he finished speaking, the generals in the tent no longer dared to say anything else, especially the more timid ones. At this moment, a thin layer of cold sweat had even seeped out of their foreheads. Seeing this scene, Kai Yan felt even more confident. After all, not wanting to lose manpower was one thing. The main reason the Shuangjin dynasty's army was willing to stop and negotiate with Li Zhongxing was because this army was at its peak and had an oppressive aura. Once the 2 sides started fighting, the Shuangjin dynasty's army might not be able to gain much of an advantage. But now, he realized that although the soldiers below were full of fighting spirit, the generals who made the decision might not have the courage to fight to the death with the Shuangjin dynasty. Clang! Before Kai Yan could feel smug for long, Li Zhongxing stood up from his tiger-skin chair and drew his personal guard saber. He walked over to Kai Yan with a majestic gait, his eyes blooming with killing intent. Since young clan leader has said so, then let's talk after we fight. Chapter 506. As soon as Li Zhongxing's challenge ended, the generals and strategists in the tent no longer hesitated. They all stared at Kai Teng like hungry wolves as if he was a piece of juicy pork. Just being stared at by the generals made Kai Teng break out in a cold sweat. He originally thought that these generals of the southern expedition were unwilling to go to war with the dual sword dynasty. However, after Li Zhongxing spoke, their sudden change in attitude revealed the problem. They weren't afraid of going to war with the Shuangjin dynasty. Instead, they were worried that the crime of going to war with the Shuangjin dynasty at the northern frontier would fall on their heads. By then, no matter who won or lost, there would be rivers of blood on both sides. Whoever started the war would be the sinner. Now that Li Zhongxing had taken on the responsibility, they naturally didn't have any scruples. After all, they were all soldiers. Kai Teng could also understand the attitude of the generals of the southern expedition. If they didn't go to war, how long would they have to endure before they had the chance to be promoted? Marshal Li, you'd better think this through. The Reflection Frost dynasty has come with sincerity. As long as you release our people, we can negotiate any compensation you want. But if you insist on not giving way, we'll carve out a path of blood to bring our brothers home even if we have to kill you. Kai Teng swallowed his saliva as he sensed the shocking killing intent from Li Zhongxing. His face turned slightly pale. Putting aside the fact that his cultivation wasn't as good as Li Zhongxing's, even if he could defeat Li Zhongxing in a one-on-one fight, there were still the generals of the northern frontier and close to 1 million soldiers of the southern expedition. What was the difference between wanting to kill his way out of this military camp in his unarmed state? Li Zhongxing stopped and rubbed the tip of his nose. He sneered and said, it seems like young clan leader is afraid. Nonsense. Kai Teng's face turned red again. He suppressed his voice and said, the men of the Shuangjin dynasty aren't afraid of anything. It's just a misunderstanding between us and the northern frontier. Now that we're willing to apologize, why must Marshal Li be so overbearing? Do you think Marshal Li will still have a good reputation if we fight? Clang! Li Zhongxing flicked the blade in his hand, pointing it straight at Kai Chen as he fiercely said, young patriarch, are you mistaken? Right now, it's the Shuangjin dynasty that's invading the northern frontier. I'm just protecting the country. I didn't send people to invade the Frost Mirror grassland to create friction. The Shuangjin dynasty was the one who started the war. Now, you're the ones asking for peace. Young clan leader can't be so naive as to think that we, the people of the northern frontier, have no temper, right? As soon as he finished speaking, the entire tent was filled with chaotic shouts of killing. The northern frontier was slightly better, especially the cities near the Central Plains. At the very least, they could be nourished by the Central Plains caravans. However, the living environment of the northern frontier wasn't much better than the Frost Mirror grassland. The only thing that could attract the caravans to bring all kinds of necessities to the northern frontier was a large amount of spiritual items and demon flesh. These were precious materials that were worth tens of thousands of gold taels in rich places. Therefore, if the people of the northern frontier wanted to survive, they had to learn how to identify all kinds of spiritual items from a young age. In the process of harvesting spiritual items, they had to fight demon beasts. Therefore, in terms of bravery and bloodthirstiness, the people of the northern frontier didn't lose to the people of the Frost Mirror grassland. Most of the people following Li Zhongxing were veterans of the southern expedition who had been trained from the northern frontier. The remaining veterans were also the first troops to follow Li Zhongxing. All of them had lived in the extreme north of the Shenwu dynasty. Facing the dangers of survival day after day had never moved these men. Was the Shuangjin dynasty trying to scare them by sending their cavalry in that direction? Hearing the incessant shouts of killing, Caitian felt a buzzing in his head. He didn't know where he got his quick wits from, but he gritted his teeth and roared, "Marshal Li, I have to admit that your troops are brave, but as the marshal, aren't you being a little too reckless? The enemy of the northern frontier isn't the Shuangjin dynasty, but the Shenwu dynasty across the river." Li Zhongxing slowly raised his right hand. Only then did the shouts of killing stop. Gulp. Caitian swallowed, feeling his throat dry. He continued, "I think, whether it's the king of the northern frontier or the Dragon King, neither of them wants to face the Shuangjin dynasty's troops while fighting the Shenwu dynasty, right? Continue to bicker with him. Drag it out for as long as you can. In any case, none of the people who invade the northern frontier will live." Suddenly, Lin Yuan's voice rang out in Li Zhongxing's mind again. Li Zhongxing's lips curled up slightly. He looked at Caitian with a kind expression and laughed. "Didn't this marshal say that I'm not qualified to speak with the Shuangjin dynasty? This marshal isn't high enough to discuss this matter with the Shuangjin dynasty. If you really want to talk, then let's wait for 2 days and do as His Highness says. Is that all right?" Although Caitian's expression was unsightly, Li Zhongxing was already pointing a blade at him. He naturally knew that he couldn't go too far. Otherwise, this fellow really wouldn't mind fighting with them. After all, the northern frontier's current thinking was that they were protecting their country. The responsibility of starting a war didn't even fall on them. But if they fought, the merits would be theirs. Caitian nodded with some difficulty and said helplessly, "Everyone, let's both take a step back. Before we reach an agreement, we won't ask you to release our brothers trapped in the northern frontier, but we ask that you provide them with supplies." Chen Zifang sneered and said to the general next to him, "Hey, Li Zhen, have you ever heard of a burglar breaking into your home and then having to provide him with food and water after holding him down with great difficulty?" "Never heard of it." Like his name, Li Zhen looked burly and powerful, but he had a sharpness that didn't match his appearance. He didn't hesitate to cooperate with Chen Zifang and said with a smile, "In my hometown, when you catch a burglar, you don't even need to send him to the officials. Just beat him to death." Caitian's expression darkened as he looked at Chen Zifang and Li Zhongxing. Before he could say, "I've tolerated you for a long time," he felt Li Zhongxing's blade getting closer to his neck. He could only bitterly say, "I know this request is a bit excessive, but those brothers can't just eat and drink, can they? Since Marshal Li also believes that this is a misunderstanding, why should we expand the conflict? If it really doesn't work, we can just send supplies to those brothers inside. Is that not enough?" Li Zhongxing lightly shook his head and said with a cold face, "Before His Highness's decree, your troops are not allowed to advance an inch. Otherwise, we will treat it as a declaration of war." At this point, Li Zhongxing glanced at the smiling Chen Zifang. Seeing that the latter was slowly becoming serious, he said in a low voice, "But your troops can give the prepared supplies to me. I will arrange for people to send them to the rear." Caitian's brows furrowed and he couldn't make up his mind. Chapter 507. In the end, Caitian chose to give in and agreed to send the supplies to the southern expedition's camp. However, he also proposed to send some cavalry with good cultivation to transport the supplies. Firstly, he wanted to ensure that these supplies would not be used to support the enemy. Even if the southern expedition wanted to take these supplies, they might not be able to kill all the cavalry. If one or two escaped, the two sides might go to war. The consequences were not something Li Zhongxing could bear. Secondly, he wanted to see for himself the condition of the grassland warriors who had lost contact with the Shuangjin dynasty and see if they were still worth saving. After all, they were now asking for peace with the northern frontier. This was equivalent to exchanging real money for the warriors trapped in the northern frontier. It was similar to the trade of people within the Shuangjin dynasty. The attitude of the northern frontier was obvious. Keiting did not think that the northern frontier's appetite would be small. Even the extremely wealthy Bloodbath tribe would have to fork out a huge sum of money to exchange for the Frost Mirror cavalrymen, not to mention the tribes that the cavalrymen originally belonged to. According to the rules, the tribes that the cavalrymen originally belonged to would have to pay at least 40% of the cost. If this amount of wealth was distributed to the various smaller tribes, it would be an astronomical sum that would suffocate them. Although the Frost Mirror grassland did not lack resources, due to the special living environment, they did not only trade animal meat, spiritual items, and other goods that were widely circulated everywhere. The extra people would also be treated as trade goods. If their own tribe could not afford to raise them, they would be sold to other tribes that had more resources but fewer people. As for their status, it was not a problem that the original tribe had to worry about. As for the remnants of a defeated army, they were clearly not worth the Mirror Frost dynasty's investment. How cruel! The corners of Li Zhongxing's mouth twitched slightly. His eyes were somewhat hazy. As a future top military officer of the Shenwu dynasty, he naturally knew what Keiting's actions meant. However, this did not mean that he could understand Frost Mirror's barbaric actions. In his opinion, if his fellow soldiers and comrades had fallen into such a situation, he would choose to save those who might still be alive no matter what the price was. He would also try his best to send the bodies of the dead back to their hometown for a proper burial. Unlike Frost Mirror Man, who regarded his compatriots as a resource and only traded with them when he could gain benefits from it, Frost Mirror Man did. If they were in the same predicament one day, would they be disgusted by their fellow soldiers' actions? After Keiting left the camp, Li Zhongxing waved his hand and dismissed all the generals and staff officers in the commander's tent. In order to prevent a troop from becoming the personal army of the commander, Li Zhong carefully divided each troop into different battalions. Every 10,000 men could form a battalion, and each battalion had a battalion commander, a deputy commander, and 3 staff officers. Including the mid-level and low-level officers, any battalion of the 3 armies of the northern frontier could almost snowball into a huge army without falling into chaos. Although the battalion commanders and deputy battalions were all outstanding graduates of the military school of the Northern Frontier Academy, their backgrounds were completely different. Some were grassroots generals promoted by Lin Yuan from poor families, while others were descendants of aristocratic families who had submitted to Lin Yuan. As for the staff officers, one was from the Demon Emperor Association, while the other 2 were guests of Li Zhongxing and Qinhu of the Genie Guards. It could be said that each faction was stuffed into a battalion to check and balance each other. No matter what the characters and abilities of these people were, they all had their own factions behind them. Naturally, it was impossible for them to get along well. After all, everyone had their own interests. Only very few people would believe in feelings and loyalty. Of course, in order to prevent each faction from harming their comrades for their own interests, Li Zhongxing also adopted a system of punishment. For example, once disobeying orders, the battalion commander, deputy battalion commander, and 3 staff officers would not be able to escape. It was fine if it was impossible, but if anyone was determined to drag down the northern frontier, before facing the anger of Lin Yuan and Li Zhongxing, they would still have to wrestle with the other 4 big shots. Unless all 5 of them were determined to betray the northern frontier, just the difference in strength alone was enough to send those disloyal fellows to hell. It was also because of this system of appointment that although Li Zhongxing was nominally the commander of the southern expedition and could mobilize any unit, he could only give a general strategy and detailed battle objectives. The degree of completion and the plan of completion were all discussed by his subordinates. If Keiting had not come to the meeting as an emissary of the Shuangjin dynasty, the northern frontier generals and staff officers would never have gathered in Li Zhongxing's tent. Now that the meeting was over, even if Li Zhongxing did not ask them to leave, they would not stay here for long. After all, no one knew when the war would start. If they had the time to chat here, they might as well go back and sharpen their weapons. Dragon King, I'm not doubting you, but I feel that your way of doing things is no different from playing with fire. After everyone had left, Li Zhongxing casually threw his saber to the side and sat down on his tiger-skin chair. He said in a deep voice, "Since you don't intend to negotiate with these barbarians, you shouldn't keep them in suspense. Now that things have come to this, it's really not easy to end things." Lin Yuan's projection slowly condensed in Li Zhongxing's commander's tent. A cold glint flashed in his different-colored eyes as he sneered, "I want to use the fate of these barbarians to tell everyone that no matter what schemes they have behind the scenes, if they don't have the determination to fight to the death with the northern frontier, don't interfere. Otherwise, this king will directly chop off their hands. Do you think it's better to settle things once and for all, or to drag things out slowly?" At this point, Lin Yuan paused for a moment and said, "The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce has indeed brought in a lot of profits. Before this, it could almost support the simultaneous operation of several projects. But after the war started, 2/3 of the reform and construction projects in the northern frontier were suspended, and all the money squeezed out was used to fund the various troops. Because of this, the various departments still owe the soldiers their salaries. Although the equipment from the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of War has been equipped with all of you, they have only paid you a portion of the cost of the materials. They still haven't paid you the labor fees and salaries." A string of black lines slowly appeared on Li Zhongxing's forehead. Of course, he knew that war cost money, and a lot of it at that. For example, the Xinwu dynasty had been peaceful for decades. Even if the officials were greedy, the treasury was still considered rich. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Lei Qiuxing slept on a mountain of gold every day. But how long had it been since the war on four fronts started? The treasury of the Xinwu dynasty had basically been emptied. Chapter 508. After all, you're a general now. You can't think in such a simple way. Theoretically, I should only pay you the salary of the South Expedition Army. Actually, you should be concerned about the expenses and rations of the surrendered troops and captives. However, I still paid the bill for you. As of now, your South Expedition Army is growing larger and larger in scale. Did I tell you to stop?" Lin Yuan sat up and said calmly, "Anyway, I don't want to fight the Xinwu dynasty and the Shuangjin dynasty slowly. If you want to let these people go, you will have to fight at the front when the Frost Mirror Barbarian invades next time. Also, don't expect me to pay you a single cent outside of the establishment." The corner of Li Zhongxing's mouth twitched slightly. He held back the swear words that were about to come out of his mouth. He didn't have the national treasury of the Xinwu dynasty that had been peaceful for decades, nor did he have the terrifying beast that was the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. If he had to support an army of millions of people, wouldn't that be asking for his life? But Lin Yuan's attitude was very clear. He didn't want to fight this war. Whoever wanted to fight would pay. Li Zhongxing wanted to complain about this kind of rascal behavior, but he didn't know how to say it. After all, the Southern Expedition's military strength was several times greater than the establishment that Lin Yuan had given him. And as the work of cleaning up the Northern Territory continued, this number was still increasing. When the war was over, they would definitely be dealt with. But Li Zhongxing didn't want to be forced into a dead end because of this matter. Then if all 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian soldiers are lost at the northern frontier, how should we deal with it? Now that the Shuangjin dynasty has taken the initiative to beg for peace with us, it seems that they are prepared to bleed a lot. But not only did the Dragon King not give them face, his actions are no different from starting a war. If they really go to war regardless of everything, it will be no less than a disaster for our northern frontier. Li Zhongxing cupped his fist at Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, "Am I right?" Li Zhongxing, who was disgusted by Lei Qiuxing's action of abandoning the people in the Northern Territory, couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes now, especially after experiencing the good life of the people in the northern frontier. Li Zhongxing couldn't be said to be loyal to anyone now. The only thing he wanted to protect was the people in the northern frontier who had sacrificed everything for their livelihood. Lin Yuan said that he wasn't willing to go to war with the Shuangjin dynasty, but at the same time, he was provoking the Shuangjin dynasty. He couldn't figure out the meaning behind this at all, so he could only look at Lin Yuan with a confused gaze, hoping to get an answer. If Lin Yuan really decided to go to war with the Shuangjin dynasty at the critical juncture where the Xinwu dynasty was about to launch a counterattack against the northern frontier, then Li Zhongxing would summon those loyal to him to launch a military remonstrance even if it meant risking his life, forcing Lin Yuan to give up this bold idea that shouldn't have existed. The northern frontier alone was enough for them to digest for a long time. Not to mention that Lei Qiuxing still had the strength to spare. Even if he could kill Lei Qiuxing in one blow, the northern frontier wouldn't be able to take down the remaining central plains and southern territories. So Li Zhongxing is right. You still have room for improvement in strategy, but in terms of strategy, you're just a chicken. Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhongxing with pity, helplessly shaking his head, and explained, "Right now, we're not the ones fighting a war. I'd rather use these military funds to develop the northern frontier and even the entire northern territory than waste them on such meaningless things. You're also one of the people with the highest status in the northern frontier. You should know how much work we still have to do and how much resources we lack." Hearing this, although Li Zhongxing didn't like the way Lin Yuan looked at him like he was an idiot, he still nodded to show his agreement. If Lin Yuan really was a warmonger, he wouldn't waste time researching the new laws of the northern frontier. He also wouldn't exterminate the sects and then punish the noble families. He also wouldn't take all the land in the northern frontier and rent it to the people for farming at a very low price. At the same time, he would establish the Northern Frontier Academy and a series of huge projects related to people's livelihood, medical care, and other fields. Just by relying on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, it wasn't impossible for Lin Yuan to cultivate the northern frontier into a war-loving land where everyone was a soldier. However, Lin Yuan's choice was to slowly develop and gradually reform. Every move might not be beneficial at the moment, but it would definitely be beneficial for the future. If there were really so many resources that he didn't have any place to use them, Lin Yuan would definitely carry out more projects and build more gathering places so that every inch of land in the northern frontier could be used properly. He wouldn't train an army to compete with the Xinwu dynasty. Although it looked like Lin Yuan made the first move, in reality, Lin Yuan's purge of the northern frontier was Lei Qiuxing's idea. The situation had developed to this point because Lei Qiuxing didn't want Lin Yuan to easily take over the northern frontier. It would be best if he acted like a tool and wiped out the rebellion in the northern frontier. After forcing the southern frontier to make a move, he would obediently retreat to his own northern frontier. However, Lei Qiuxing wasn't the only tyrannical person in this world. Lin Yuan, who was able to come up with God's mandate and King's law, was no less tyrannical than Lei Qiuxing. However, Lei Qiuxing didn't have the boldness to lie by the side of the bed and allow others to sleep soundly. From the beginning, he only wanted to use the northern frontier as a test subject for the reform, so that the hostility of those aristocratic families and sects would be transferred to us. However, now that the northern frontier is strong, Lei Qiuxing can no longer let us continue to grow. Once we take over the northern frontier, the speed of our development will definitely rise to another level. At that time, the extremely weak Xinwu dynasty might not be able to be destroyed at any moment, but the outcome would already be determined. Therefore, the battle between the Xinwu dynasty and the northern frontier will happen sooner or later. It's just a matter of waiting for us to be fully prepared before attacking, or Lei Qiuxing taking advantage of the fact that we haven't stabilized our footing yet. For an outstanding military strategist like me, Lei Qiuxing's actions weren't out of my expectations. On the contrary, I didn't expect the Shinwu dynasty to be so weak. Therefore, I'm more and more worried about what kind of trump card he has in his hands. Under these circumstances, our own wishes don't matter at all. Right now, the Reflection Frost dynasty has changed their ways and is humbly begging for peace with us. It's not because of the reasons they've given us, but simply because they don't want to fight. Therefore, whether we teach them a lesson or not, they won't fight. Or rather, they won't choose to fight to the death with us right now. Do you think they will be grateful to us if we let those barbarians go? Lin Yuan's eyes flickered with an obscure brilliance. It was as if he was looking at the Frost Mirror Khan from countless miles away and seeing through his heart. His tone was even more certain than guessing. Chapter 509. Isn't that the case? Li Zhongxing's eyes widened. If all 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen are killed, it'll be a blood feud. Those barbarians will never let it go. They'll have to go to war eventually. Your actions will definitely bring the war forward. Li Zhongxing felt that the more he listened, the more confused he became. It seemed that Lin Yuan was right, but his reason told him that this was all sophistry. Lin Yuan definitely had other plans behind his back. After such a huge feud, even if Frost Mirror Khan didn't want to go to war with Lin Yuan, those tribes would definitely force him to send troops to the northern frontier. After all, only some of them were unlucky now. Once the war started, the northern frontier and the whole Shuangjin dynasty would be in trouble. Even if it was for the survival of their own tribes, most of them would choose to go to war. Frost Mirror Khan is like a wolf. Before they're full, they'll keep following you. When you show a weakness, they'll pounce on you and tear your flesh apart to fill their stomach. If you don't want to, you can only raise your weapons and beat them until they're scared. Only then will they tuck their tails between their legs and show their more dog-like side. They'll stay away from you and won't dare to provoke you for a while. If we show weakness now, the Shuangjin dynasty won't be grateful to us. Instead, they'll think that the northern frontier is only strong on the outside but weak on the inside. After they've healed their wounds, the first thing they'll do is to invade our territory and burn, kill, and pillage. By then, it'll be an endless war. Mirror Frost had fallen into Lei Chuxing's trap. Not only were the 700,000 Mirror Frost cavalrymen trapped in the Central Plains unable to come out, even more Mirror Frost cavalrymen would be trapped in this deadly trap. Based on this battle alone, I am certain that at least half of the Shuangjin dynasty's border army near the Shinwu dynasty will be destroyed. Apart from the border army, the tribes near the Shinwu dynasty will also lose many young and strong men. Of course, we weren't the only ones who knew that Lei Chuxing's concession was a trap. The Shuangjin dynasty knew it too. The reason they wanted to make peace with us was to preserve their strength as much as possible so that they wouldn't lose too much of their strength. They might even lose the edge of the Frost Mirror grassland so that their ranch could become our hunting ground. If both sides worked together in the beast tide in the Hingduan mountain range, the Shuangjin dynasty might not even be able to recover from the setback. Speaking of which, if we can't determine the victor between us and Lei Chuxing, then we need a way out. Therefore, the Shuangjin dynasty's invasion this time is a way for us to ease our relationship. At that time, we can choose to call a truce and head north together to collect this debt of blood from the Shuangjin dynasty. Then, we can return to our respective territories and start accumulating strength for the next war. But this time, if we sign a truce, we won't have an excuse to head north to attack the Frost Mirror grassland. Naturally, we can't join forces to attack the Shuangjin dynasty. Even if we shamelessly call a truce, the other dynasties won't just stand by and watch us attack the Shuangjin dynasty. If they cut off the trade with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, we won't even have a place to cry. So, they only need to withstand the pressure from Lei Chuxing. Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled. I don't want the northern frontier to fall into a two-sided war. I just want to tell these barbarians one thing: the northern frontier will never back down from a fight. As long as they want to fight, I'll fight with them. Plus, there's a special tribal system there. Before we can catch our breath, Shuangjin Khan's throne will probably change hands. Do you think that Shuangjin Khan, who has dominated the grassland for 50 years, will do such a profitable business for a bunch of dead people? Li Zhongxing's eyes widened even more. He said with a puzzled expression, since the Shuangjin dynasty has already seen through the trap, won't they know to withdraw and wait for the right opportunity? They'll attack us when we fight with Lei Qiuxing. No matter who they help, or whether they fight on both sides, they'll still benefit from it. That's what we need to do. Fan the flames, add oil, let this fire burn even more fiercely. Let the Shuangjin dynasty suffer the greatest loss and force them to swallow their anger. The coldness in Lin Yuan's eyes slowly faded and turned into an obscure emotion. I'm slow-witted. I don't understand what the Dragon King means. Li Zhongxing shook his head with a bitter smile. However, he was sharp enough to smell the blood in Lin Yuan's words. In the end, weren't they still going to fight? Sophistry indeed. The loss of 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian is not an unacceptable loss for the Shuangjin dynasty, because the number of young men who die from the cold, starvation, or being killed by demon beasts on the grassland is far more than that. However, for some tribes, the loss of these young men is a disaster. They won't accept this result easily, so they'll do everything they can to recoup their losses. For example, 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian died on the northern frontier, but 700,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian killed and looted as they pleased in the Central Plains. If they want to recoup their losses, do you think it's better to start a war with the northern frontier, or go to the Central Plains, where they think it's incomparably prosperous, and even plunder for a while more in the south? If we show enough strength, the Shuangjin barbarian will wisely choose to avoid us and hold this grudge in their hearts for the time being. However, in the current situation, their first choice is still to plunder the Shenwu dynasty. This wise decision is what both Lei Qiuxing and I want to see. The only ones who want to stop them are the higher-ups of the Shuangjin dynasty. However, the tribes that have suffered losses won't let go of such a good opportunity, especially the small and medium-sized tribes outside the range of Frost Mirror Khan's influence. Even if they pretend to be obedient, they won't let go of such a fat piece of meat like the Shenwu dynasty. Lin Yuan's voice trembled as he said, Lei Qiuxing used the bones of countless people to build a path to victory for himself. In this aspect, he's even more of a bloodthirsty demon beast than this king. But you also said that the Shuangjin dynasty already knows that this is a trap. Before Li Zhongxing could finish his words, his face turned pale and he swallowed dryly. He suddenly realized that Lin Yuan, this demon beast, knew more about the situation of the various factions than he, a professionally trained officer, did. The unique tribal system of the Shuangjin dynasty was no different from that of the demon beasts in the Hingduan mountain range. However, the beast Lord Kirin could intimidate countless demon beasts, but the old Frost Mirror Khan didn't have such strength. Although he was revered as the king of the grassland, the small and medium-sized tribes outside the range of the Blood Liao tribe's influence had never obeyed Frost Mirror Khan's orders. Chapter 5:10. The harvest of 700,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian in the Central Plains was enough to make most of the Frost Mirror tribes jealous. It was also enough to drive the tribes that had suffered heavy losses crazy. Even if the Frost Mirror Khan ordered them not to enter the Shenwu dynasty's territory, they wouldn't listen. Lin Yuan's act of killing 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian was equivalent to pouring oil on Lei Qiuxing's trap. The fire that wasn't strong enough to begin with instantly engulfed more than half of the Frost Mirror grassland. And this was an overt scheme. Unless the Shuangjin dynasty was willing to start an all-out war with the northern frontier, they could only choose the seemingly weak Shenwu dynasty. This king isn't as ruthless as Lei Qiuxing, but this king loves his own people more than Lei Chuxing. Lin Yuan finally regained his composure and said with a smile, "No one knows what Lei Chuxing's trump card is. This king doesn't want him to use it on the northern frontier. It's better to send him more Frost Mirror Barbarian. When he can't hold on anymore, he'll naturally reveal his trump card in advance." "I know what to do." Li Zhongxing nodded with a serious expression. No one knew what Lei Chuxing's trump card was, but in this situation, unless Lei Chuxing went crazy, he definitely had something that could change the situation in an instant. Letting Lei Chuxing use this thing on the Shuangjin Barbarian was obviously much better than using it on the northern frontier. Although he didn't like this kind of scheme, it wasn't his own doing. However, this wasn't his doing, and it was indeed for the sake of the entire northern region. Therefore, even if Li Zhongxing didn't like it, he could only persuade himself to accept and even obey. The next morning, Kai Yan led 30 Shuel Yao cavalry and 200+ carriages of supplies, his face solemn as he arrived at the southern expedition scouting area. After yesterday's meeting, Li Zhongxing had no intention of stopping him. Very quickly, he led the 5,000 light cavalry to the front of the formation. Marshal Li looks a lot more energetic. Kei Fan rubbed her hands together. She had dark circles under her eyes, and it was obvious that she hadn't rested well. In fact, Li Zhongxing had also gone through a lot of mental struggles last night. But after thinking it over, she still decided that Lin Yuan's actions were the most beneficial for the northern frontier. It was also the best way to break Lei Chuxing's trap. At the very least, it was the method with the least losses. So, for the latter half of the night, Li Zhongxing didn't continue to brainstorm with herself and fell asleep peacefully. But looking at Kai Yan's appearance, Lei Chuxing knew that this young clan leader of the Green Fish tribe didn't have a good time after returning home yesterday. The arrogant and unreasonable Shuangjin dynasty had lowered their proud heads, but they didn't get the respect they deserved from the northern frontier. The situation they were facing was completely different from what they had expected. Not only did the northern frontier not show the slightest bit of fear, they even seemed to be full of fighting spirit. But even if the northern frontier wanted to fight, the Shuangjin dynasty didn't. They only wanted to preserve their strength and wait until the northern frontier and the Xinwu dynasty had a decisive battle before coming to take advantage of the situation. There was no need for them to help that bastard Lei Chuxing fight the vanguard after falling into his trap. At least, that was what the generals of the Shuangjin dynasty convinced themselves. But according to Kai Yan's report, the northern frontier didn't plan to release the captives immediately. They wanted to send the message back and wait for the reply from the northern frontier prince's mansion before deciding on their next move. Before that, they couldn't even send their supply wagons past the southern expedition's position. They could only send some cavalry to accompany the southern expedition to transport the wagons. In the words of those scholars, the behavior of the northern frontier was no different from being shameless when they were given face. But they couldn't do anything because, just as Lin Yuan had predicted, the Shuangjin dynasty didn't plan to fight this battle. So, they could only vent their anger on Kai Yan, the envoy. As a result, Kai Yan looked like he was going to collapse at any moment. Li Zhongxing glanced at Kai Yan and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I didn't expect young clan leader to be so knowledgeable about the situation of our brothers trapped in the northern frontier. 500,000 Frost Mirror Barbarian soldiers wasn't a small number. These 200 wagons of supplies were only enough to fill the gaps between their teeth." Although the defense line of the northern frontier wasn't that tight, the intelligence network formed by the Association of the Demon Emperor's members and the embroidered uniform guards wasn't something that the Shuangjin dynasty could infiltrate. So, the Shuangjin barbarian soldiers who were still defending the plains definitely hadn't made contact with the main forces. So, Kai Yan's 200 wagons of supplies were just a pretense. At the same time, it was also to express his distrust of the northern frontier. Kai Yan smiled helplessly and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He said with an apologetic smile, "Marshal Li must be joking. Just by looking at your southern expedition, I know that the Northern Frontier's army isn't ordinary. We know our own strength. How could those good-for-nothings be a match for your Northern Frontier's army? Let alone 500,000, even if they had 200,000 left, they would be burning incense to thank the gods. At this point, Keijua paused for a moment before continuing, we're just going to take a look at the situation today. Although the supplies we brought are better than nothing, they should be able to last for half a day. Once we confirm the situation, we'll be able to make preparations. Li Zhongxing expressionlessly pulled on the reins and turned his horse around. He said coldly, I'll say the ugly words first. Your cavalry had better behave themselves. If they do anything inappropriate, I have the right to kill them on the spot. Also, after confirming the situation, you can prepare for the next shipment, but all of your cavalry will have to come back with you. Do you understand this? Understand my ass. Kei Yan's face suddenly darkened. He didn't expect Li Zhongxing's slap to come so quickly and so suddenly. They had prepared such a small amount of supplies in order to annoy Li Zhongxing and make his men make a few more trips. Of course, there was no lack of distrust in Li Zhongxing. They were worried that the southern expedition would seize too much of the supplies, which would be considered an act of aiding the enemy. But Li Zhongxing's attitude was also very clear. You don't trust me, and I don't trust you. You think I'll seize your supplies? I think you're using this method to increase your troops. But then again, both sides were just trying to annoy each other. They didn't really suspect each other of doing anything. After all, the supplies were only enough to fill the gaps between Li Zhongxing's teeth. Even if Li Zhongxing seized them, they would only be able to fill the gaps between their teeth. With the troops around him, they could eat all 200 carriages of supplies in 1 or 2 meals. Although the dozens of cavalry were all in the late stage of the airborne realm, such a small number of people was definitely not enough to increase the number of troops. What was the difference between increasing the number of troops in such a scale and sending them to their deaths? Chapter 5:11. Marshal, what should we do with the Frost Mirror cavalry that came with us? A light rider rode up to Li Zhongxing, a faint murderous intent flashing across his fair face. The fair-skinned young general was a graduate of Qiao Yu's batch. However, unlike Qiao Yu, who was known as Black Bear, due to his simple and honest nature, Qiao Yu was known as the Black Bear, which made him the type of general who would charge and break through enemy lines. On the other hand, the fair-skinned young general, Zhang Shuzhu, was more of a scholarly general. His training was decent as well, having reached the pinnacle of the airborne realm before the age of 30. He was only one step away from reaching the celestial star realm. Li Zhongxing was also one of the military mentors of the Northern Frontier Academy. Qiao Yu and Zhang Shuzhu were both students that he thought highly of. Although they had their own shortcomings and were not as good as Qin Yu and Zhao Guangchong, who were taught by Lin Yuan and were able to lead troops to the south as soon as they graduated, he still wanted to get closer to Li Zhongxing. To be fair, Zhang Shuzhu was not worse than the students taught by Lin Yuan. He could become a famous general after some training. However, his biggest weakness was hatred. Zhang Shuzhu's parents were both civilians. They did not even have the ability to move to other places to live, let alone have the ability to cultivate. Therefore, every year when the Frost Mirror Barbarian raided the border, Zhang Shuzhu and his parents could only rely on luck to avoid being killed. However, luck would always run out. When Zhang Shuzhu was 7 years old, the Shuangjin dynasty raided the border. His parents were killed by the sword, and only the young Zhang Shuzhu escaped by hiding in a secret cellar at home. Since then, the seed of hatred had been planted in Zhang Shuzhu's heart. Lin Yuan set up the Northern Frontier Academy and supported poor students. This was a great opportunity for Zhang Shuzhu, and he did show his extraordinary talent. Compared to the children of aristocratic families who grew up with spiritual objects, Zhang Shuzhu, who started cultivating in his 20s, could not achieve much. However, there was no limit to human perseverance and potential. Zhang Shizhu, who had a blood feud, was far more hardworking than the other students in the same batch. His cultivation, the art of war, and even strategy were all excellent in almost every subject. However, when everyone thought that Zhang Shizhu could win Lin Yuan's favor and become the most dazzling star of the northern frontier in the future, this guy rejected Lin Yuan's olive branch without hesitation and went straight to the main camp of the southern expedition. From Zhang Shizhu's point of view, it was impossible for the southern expedition army to continue south in a short period of time. However, the cleanup work in the north still had to continue. Apart from those clans that were still stubbornly resisting, the Frost Mirror barbarian cavalry that pillaged the border would be the southern expedition army's main opponent for a very long time. And Zhang Shizhu was indeed capable. After a series of tests, Li Zhongxing believed that this guy, who was not much younger than him, would become the most dazzling star of the northern frontier in the future, even if he rejected the recruitment of the so-called Star General class. Therefore, even though he knew that Zhang Shizhu was currently on the southern expedition, he would divide the southern expedition in the future and take part of the people to form a new army to wrestle with the Shuangjin barbarian. Li Zhongxing gladly accepted Zhang Shizhu as his disciple and even trained him as his successor. However, Zhang Shizhu's performance in the past 2 months had indeed proved that he deserved Li Zhongxing's favor. In response to this proud disciple's question, Li Zhongxing only raised his eyelids and said through secret voice sending, "The Shuangjin dynasty has 35 cavalry with them this time. Apart from the heavy military supplies we have, you can only take 50 people with you. How do you think we should deal with them? Kill them." A cold light bloomed in Zhang Shizhu's eyes as he replied without hesitation. Li Zhongxing was silent for a while. Zhang Shizhu scratched the back of his head and said with a smile, "Marshal is not a person who makes arbitrary decisions, but with your authority, it's not impossible for you to let the Shuangjin barbarian go. However, you chose to stall for time without discussing with us. This action already shows that Marshal has no intention of letting those barbarians go. Moreover, you're not the only one who has an opinion on this matter." "Ha!" Li Zhongxing smiled noncommittally. He just waved his horsewhip gently, indicating for Zhang Shizhu to leave. Just as Lin Yuan had said, Li Zhongxing was a chicken when it came to strategy. His current actions could only deceive the Shuangjin barbarian. However, those in the southern expedition with discerning eyes could see that Li Zhongxing, who had always followed the advice of others, had chosen to use stalling tactics to cut off the Frost Mirror barbarian's chances of survival. It was obvious that someone was guiding him behind the scenes. And although Li Zhongxing was the king of the northern frontier, he only had the authority to make suggestions. He did not have the authority to directly command the commander-in-chief of the northern frontier's 3 armies. If it was Li Zhongxing's idea, then Li Zhongxing would still have to discuss it with them before deciding whether to do it or not. That was why the entire southern expedition was so quiet. No one argued with Li Zhongxing like Li Zhongxing did with Lin Yuan. The reason was very simple. Most of them were already scared out of their wits by Lin Yuan. Lin Yuan had never tasted defeat since his debut. Therefore, they could not see the depth of Lin Yuan's decision. Even if they could see it clearly, no one would overestimate themselves and ask Lin Yuan to correct it. When Zhang Shizhu gradually rode away, Li Zhongxing once again said through secret sound transmission, "Just say that it was my idea. Go to that place and pick a group of ruthless people to go with you. First, lead them around in circles. After you have shed all pretense of cordiality, you must do it cleanly. Don't leave any hidden dangers." Speaking up to here, Li Zhongxing paused and smiled. Besides that, Wei River City has been breached, and there are still over 100,000 reserve troops of the Divine Forest Army gathered near Zhangtao City. We can't clear them out for the time being, but we have to let these Frost Mirror barbarians vent their anger, right? This general will not disappoint the Grand Marshal. Zhang Shizhu pulled on the reins and turned his head to look at Li Zhongxing. His white face squeezed out a bright smile. As for how to use these 200 carriages of supplies to provoke the conflict between the Frost Mirror Barbarian and the Shinlin Jun reserves, he had already outlined a rough plan in his mind. At the same time, he also guessed what Black Zhao, who gave him today's position and opportunity, was planning. Ting stared blankly at the two people's lips moving. He subconsciously felt his heart sink. But when he listened carefully, he could not understand what they were talking about. Although they were speaking the common language of Tianwu continent, the words they spat out were all numbers. For someone like him who did not know the code of the northern frontier, it was no different from listening to a heavenly book. But his keen sense of danger still made him feel that the southern expedition was secretly planning something. Chapter 5:12. Young clan leader, why are you in a daze? Li Zhongxing urged his horse to the side of the hesitant Ting and lightly poked him with the end of his whip. Only then did Ting wake up from his deep thoughts. His entire body seemed to have been startled, and cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. That was my favorite student, but his personality is a little weird. He doesn't know how to speak the common language of the Sky Martial continent, so we were using a special secret signal to communicate. I told him to go back and pick 50 capable brothers to escort you on this trip. Is there any problem on your side? Ting finally calmed down. When he looked at Li Zhongxing again, he discovered that he was smiling warmly. Gently shaking his head, Ting forced himself to calm down and said, but I heard that the northern frontier isn't very peaceful right now. Can 50 people really escort the supplies safely to the destination? Why don't we discuss it again and have both sides send more people? When he heard the number 50 people, the stone in Ting's heart slowly fell. After all, the cavalry of the northern frontier couldn't be compared to the cavalry of the Shuangjin dynasty. Even the horses they rode were inferior warhorses bought from the Shuangjin dynasty. Even if their cultivation was higher, 50 people against 35 people might not have more than a 50% chance of victory. And even if they could defeat them, it was impossible to keep all 35 of them at the northern frontier. As long as one or two escaped, the northern frontier wouldn't be able to take it. Even Ting, who had always believed in his intuition, felt that he was being too cautious, and even a little oversensitive. Li Zhongxing lightly shook his head and bitterly smiled. To be honest, although there are many hidden dangers in the northern frontier, the real threat is the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shinlin Jun's reservists that we couldn't completely eliminate. With your people here, even if we bump into the Frost Mirror Cavalry, they won't do anything. And if we encounter those reservists, even 2,000 people won't be able to do anything. But if the number of people is smaller, the target will naturally be smaller, and it will be much safer. Ting stared blankly at Li Zhongxing. Shinlin Jun was the trump card of the Shinwu dynasty, and was also the trump card of Lei Qiuxing's dragon throne. Even the reservists were quite a formidable existence. Furthermore, Wei River City, which was known as the Impregnable Fortress, was also of famous existence. But now, the reserve force of the Divine Forest Army had been defeated and even Wei River City had been breached. What kind of monsters were these people? Thinking of this, Ting's last trace of hostility towards the northern frontier completely dissipated. He bitterly smiled and said, if that's the case, then we'll do as the Grand Marshal wishes. I'll go inform them to prepare to depart. Although the men of the Shuangjin dynasty didn't lack courage and bravery, the special living environment still made them have the personalities of wolves and dogs. Just as Lin Yuan predicted, the stronger the northern frontier displayed, the more the Shuangjin dynasty didn't want to provoke the northern frontier. But, Ting, who was just about to leave, suddenly remembered something. He abruptly pulled on the reins and said, our 13th prince was deceived by the Shinwu dynasty some time ago and led his troops into the northern frontier's territory by mistake. It's been almost half a month since then. I wonder if our 13th prince is a guest at your residence. Although the third prince speculated that the 13th prince was dead, the proud Shuang Jianren didn't think so. In their eyes, the northern frontier was just a group of nouveau riches. They might not even be able to withstand the counterattack of the Shenwu dynasty. How could they offend the Shuangjin dynasty at this time? Therefore, even if the 13th prince went on a killing spree in the northern frontier, he only needed to announce his identity after he was defeated. Not only would the northern frontier not dare to touch him, they would even treat him as a guest of honor and wait for the Shuangjin dynasty to take him away. Young master, you must be joking. I haven't heard any news about the 13th prince. The warm smile on Li Zhongxing's face instantly disappeared. He said coldly, I will write another letter to ask the northern frontier's residents. However, I advise you not to have any delusions about this matter. You know our Dragon King's personality. The Shuangjin dynasty has sent troops to invade the northern frontier one after another. If they don't pay a price, they will lose face. This, Keting originally thought that taking the 13th prince out was just a matter of convenience. After all, they could let the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarians go. If they let a few more people go, they wouldn't be criticized. However, Li Zhongxing's cold attitude was telling him to stop dreaming. The Shuangjin dynasty would definitely pay a price for these two invasions. Between the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian and the 13th prince, he could only choose one. I still have military matters to attend to. Farewell. Without waiting for Kai Yen to quibble, Li Zhongxing cupped his fists and urged his horse to rush towards the army camp. He's trying to sow discord. When Li Zhongxing disappeared from sight, Keting threw the horsewhip in his hand to the ground. Between the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarians and the 13th prince, this was a choice that even a child could make. However, when it came to Keting, he couldn't make up his mind. Chapter 513. Shenwu Dynasty, Imperial Capital. Lei Chuxing paced back and forth in Yangxin Palace with his hands behind his back. He glanced around the empty palace with a gloomy face. The entire Yangxin Palace was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Anyone who got close to the palace would find it hard to breathe. Lei Chuxing's plan had only begun to work now. After opening up the borders, the border army under his command retreated to the central plains. Although they might not be able to confront the Frost Mirror cavalry head-on, they could still defend the imperial city and the nearby cities. Before the war began, Lei Chuxing had already ensured his own safety. However, the northern frontier did not have such a good condition. The northern battlefront army was still in the north. Most of the soldiers in the southern battlefront army were new recruits. Even the old soldiers were just average. They were much weaker than the elite soldiers in the border army. The only force that could give him pressure was the fallen star army that Yan Xingqi had trained. But the number of soldiers was too small. In a large-scale battle where more than 1 million soldiers were involved, what could 5,000 soldiers do to him? Lei Chuxing could never imagine that any army in the northern frontier could fight the Shuangjin barbarians' main force head-on. Therefore, when he knew that the Shuangjin dynasty was approaching Donglin City, Lei Chuxing was so excited. He wanted the Shuangjin dynasty to charge in and destroy the entire northern frontier. Then, he could clean up the mess. However, the Shuangjin barbarians stopped. Their main forces didn't act like before, recklessly charging into the northern territories to burn, kill, and plunder. Instead, after encountering the southern expedition army that Lei Chuxing deemed to be unable to withstand a single blow, they suddenly stopped advancing. Both sides even began to communicate. If the Shuangjin dynasty reached a peace agreement with the northern frontier, it would be a terrible nightmare for him. After all, his trump card was still in the preparation stage. If the northern frontier lost the Shuangjin dynasty's restraint, not only would they be able to quickly annex the entire northern territory, they could even deploy a series of battle plans along the river, waiting for his army to smash their heads and bleed. That's right, his head was broken and bleeding. Although he felt that the army at the northern frontier was mediocre, they were from the Xinwu dynasty and not the Qingjiang dynasty, which had the best navy in the world. Letting his meticulously trained divine marshal heavy steps cross the Wei River to fight was equivalent to throwing iron cans into the Wei River. Who can tell me what the situation is in the north? Without Zhang Xiu, is your embroidered guard all trash? Lei Qiuxing's gaze swept across the shadows of the Hall of Mental Cultivation as he roared angrily, "If I had known that the embroidered uniform guard was only at this level, I would have let the Servants' Administration take over the Northern Intelligence Network. Do not challenge this monarch's patience. You must send me the latest intelligence on the North within 4 hours. Furthermore, all of this monarch's orders must be completed with the highest priority." "Yes. Understood. As you command." Several feeble voices rang out from the shadows. The embroidered uniform guard's intelligence network in the north had not been disbanded, but due to Lei Qiuxing's suspicious nature, the original officers had all been purged and replaced, regardless of whether they were loyal to him or not. There was no lack of spies that he had personally placed by Zhang Xiu's side. Changing generals at the last minute was a huge taboo in the army. Coupled with Lei Qiuxing's bloody purges, the entire embroidered uniform guard felt insecure. They couldn't even guarantee their own safety, so who would focus on gathering intelligence and establishing a spy network for him? Moreover, in this kind of intelligence network, there were often hundreds or thousands of spies lying dormant in a single command. Only by extending this network could a complete and mature intelligence network be formed. Zhang Xiu had transferred away a group of loyal higher-ups of the embroidered uniform guard, and Lei Qiuxing had purged them himself. Currently, it was unknown how many spies were in contact with the embroidered uniform guard but didn't have official identities. After all, their command lines were already gone. Who could verify their identities? Under such circumstances, the current situation of the embroidered uniform guard wasn't as simple as just rotting away. It was even on the verge of collapse. Lei Qiuxing still had delusions that the embroidered uniform guard could maintain the powerful operational capabilities that it had when Zhang Xiu was still in power. This was no different from a fool's dream. Of course, this kind of intelligence network was different from the military system. At the very least, the bloody purge of the higher-ups had shocked most people. There wouldn't be an army mutiny. As long as there was enough time, the embroidered uniform guard's original structure could definitely be restored. However, if he wanted to restore the all-pervasive scouting ability of the North, he would have to ask the Shifter Emperor Council and the embroidered uniform guard if they were willing to do so. Since you knew it would be so troublesome, why didn't you kill it back then? When I dealt with Zhang Xiu, I had the opportunity to kill it. It was just a matter of convenience. A black shadow flashed, and the shadow that was supposed to be overseeing the south slowly appeared behind Lei Qiuxing. Lei Qiuxing shook his head lightly and said bitterly, "The Black Jiao is indeed a difficult opponent, but it cannot die. At the very least, it cannot die now, and it cannot die at our hands." Oh. The shadow raised its eyebrows imperceptibly, as if it was curious about this statement. With the Black Jiao as the representative of the northern frontier, the Black Jiao has already set its sights on those top powers. Because of the previous incident, the Black Jiao has shown the ambition and ability to replace me. Those top powers are definitely begging for it. Otherwise, why do you think the chaos in the Xinwu dynasty has continued until now? Isn't it just those guys who are creating opportunities for the Black Jiao and stalling for time? In addition, the relationship behind the Black Jiao is also complicated. Forget about the ancient demon court, whose real identity is unknown. Anyway, it can establish a relationship with the top powers. Even if its identity is fabricated, it doesn't matter. However, its current identity is the Lord of the Northern Frontier and the Beast King of the Hengduan Mountains. It is also inextricably linked to those dragon blood demons. All the forces are trying to rope it in. If the Black Jiao dies at this time, not only will the northern frontier go out of control, but the Sea Demon Rebellion in the south and the Hengduan Mountains will also take revenge. Even the Frost Mirror Dynasty and the Qingjiang Dynasty will try to take a step further. Lei Chuxing put his hands behind his back, exhaled a turbid breath, and said in a cold voice, "The Black Jiao was born as a demon beast. This is its natural disadvantage. On the other hand, we are just people who killed our master and usurped the throne. We are not much stronger than it. The other 6 dynasties have been trying to find ways to balance the other forces for so many years. They will not tolerate a usurper like me to continue to exist." Got it. The shadow nodded slightly. He did not understand Lei Chuxing's thoughts, but as the shadow of Lei Chuxing, he only needed to obey the order. Chapter 5:14. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. A cold glint flashed across Lei Chuxing's eyes as he said, "Although the cultists' invasion into the south this time is unexpected, if we use it well, it will be of help. At least the blame won't be directly placed on us. That plan can be started. Once I have a definite order, release them immediately. The south isn't ready yet. Moreover, this is the reason why we fell out with the top powers this time. If we reveal our strength now, it'll be no different from drinking poison to quench our thirst. Although we can resolve the Frost dynasties and the North's problems, the top powers definitely won't tolerate us anymore. In fact, they might even interfere directly with this matter." The shadow took a deep breath and sighed. Moreover, the evil cult's life in the south is not good enough. They are not powerful enough. If we force them to be blamed, it will not be justifiable. There is no other way. Even if we don't want to fall out with those top forces, with their existence, we are no longer on the same side. It is only a matter of time before we fall out with them. Therefore, we don't need to hide anything from them. We just need to explain it to those who have not been in contact with this circle. It is not that I am greedy for power, but after all, the follow-up plan needs a lot of manpower and material resources to be implemented. The Xinwu dynasty can't be given up now. At least, we can't give up before we reach the first stage of the plan." Lei Chuxing shook his head gently and sighed. "The Shuangjin barbarian now thinks that we are weak and can be bullied. Our previous plan not only failed to suppress the northern frontier, but also shot ourselves in the foot. Should we ask the border army to take action?" The shadow looked serious. "If there are too many Frost Mirror Barbarian coming in this time, it will not be good for our recovery. We don't have to go all out. Ask the border army to expand the protection area. We have to protect at least half of the territory in the Central Plains. At the same time, open up a path for Frost Mirror's cavalry to go south. Although those guys are on our side, they are also hungry wolves. Without a large number of blood sacrifices to make them happy, even I can't tell what will happen." Lei Chuxing's lips curled up slightly as he sneered, "Not long after, the Xinwu dynasty will return to my rule. I can even swallow up half of the Shuangjin dynasty. After recuperating for a few years, I will turn around and swallow up the Qingjiang Empire. When that time comes, I will monopolize half of the world. Who can stop me?" "Yes." The shadow nodded slightly and disappeared into the shadows again. "Although the scheme is good, it's a pity that there will be endless troubles in the future." Lei Chuxing put his hands behind his back and sighed. "If I hadn't been prepared, the Black Jiao would have been in a general's position. Now, it's fine." However, Lei Chuxing, who had a guilty conscience, was naturally unwilling to agree. Therefore, the drama of the 4 forces attacking one was born. Although the top forces didn't have any evidence, those people knew how terrifying they were. Not to mention seeing it, even if it was just a groundless rumor, they would quickly investigate the situation. If there were any signs of something wrong, they would directly kill them. If that fellow hadn't reacted quickly and retreated with them, there would be no survivors in the entire Shenwu dynasty now. According to the original script, Lei Chuxing would be the biggest loser, and Lin Yuan, Lei Chuxing, and even the combined forces of the aristocratic families, which were not as powerful as the northern frontier, would become the winners and begin to divide this fat cake. However, among these people who had already gained benefits, except for Lin Yuan, Lei Chuxing didn't have the intention to put the others in his eyes. His real opponents had always been those high and mighty top forces. At least, this was Lei Chuxing's plan at the moment. Moreover, the development of the matter was slowly moving in the direction he had envisioned. However, no matter whether it was the reaction of Lin Yuan or the top forces, Lei Chuxing was an uncontrollable variable. Even if he was lucky enough to make use of the evil cult members introduced by Lin Yuan to talk about the matter, in an attempt to delay the time for the top forces to intervene in this matter, there were several changes in the cards in Lin Yuan's hands that he couldn't figure out in any case. Chapter 5:15. On the Northern Plains. The Shuangjin dynasty's supply wagons had already set out for quite some distance. Even from the highest watchtower in Donglin City, one could only see a small shadow of the convoy. It wouldn't be long before the convoy completely disappeared from their sight and stepped into the undercurrent of the conflict between the three factions. "How should I address you, General?" Keizhuo urged his warhorse to catch up with Zhang Shuzhu, who was at the front of the group, and asked with a chuckle. Keizhuo preferred the 13th prince over the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen, but he knew very well that no matter which answer he chose, it was the same as choosing death. The only difference was that one would be executed immediately, while the other would be a delayed death. The only way he could find to survive was to find a way to stay on the northern frontier after this matter was over. If things didn't work out, then he would choose the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen and hide in the northern territories for a period of time. He would return to the plains after the Bloodsil tribe had declined. Even if he lost everything he had now, it was still better than losing his life. At this moment, Kei Ting finally understood why the third prince had given him such a lucrative task, and why the people of the large tribes had mocked him. He hadn't thought much of it when he had received the generous gifts, but now it seemed that these fellows had clearly regarded him as a dead man. If he wanted to survive, he had to curry favor with the northern frontier by hook or by crook in exchange for a period of protection from the northern frontier or a permanent residence on the northern frontier. Because of her nervousness, she urgently needed someone to talk to. Secondly, Keizhuo's abilities lay in his cultivation and horseback. If he wanted to make a living after joining the northern frontier, he would have to walk the path of the army. Although Zhang Shuzhu wasn't conspicuous yet, someone who could gain the favor of Li Zhongxing would definitely have great achievements in the future. That was why he chattered so much in order to make himself known. It could be said that he had put a lot of thought into it. Zhang Shuzhu glanced at Keizhuo and rolled his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have a good impression of the Shuangjin barbarian to begin with. It was already good enough that he didn't draw his sword. Furthermore, Li Zhongxing had set him up as a reclusive person who didn't know how to speak the common language of the Tianwu continent. Under such circumstances, unless he had no other choice, he naturally wouldn't speak. Although these Shuangjin barbarian were already food in his mouth, he wouldn't disregard the big picture for a little personal grudge before he was completely confident. Moreover, it was obvious that Li Zhongxing had reminded him of an opportunity that could bring even greater losses to the barbarians. Why wouldn't Zhang Shuzhu do it? However, these Shuangjin barbarian couldn't all die in the ambush. At least 2 or 3 Frost Mirror barbarian had to be released before they could return to pass on the news that Li Zhongxing wanted the Shuangjin dynasty to know. The supply convoy had been ambushed by Shenlin Jun's reserve forces, and the convoy was almost completely wiped out. When the time came, Li Zhongxing would take the opportunity to remove the checkpoint and find a way to lead these Shuangjin barbarian to meet the real Shenlin Jun's reserve forces. Including the 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian, whose fate was already sealed, Zhang Xiuzhu had to use his great willpower to suppress himself so that he wouldn't laugh out loud. This time, the 49 knights following Zhang Xiuzhu weren't professional soldiers from the northern frontier. Some of them were hired wanderers, and some were cultivators that the Shifter Emperors Association had recruited from the Mercenary Union and the Demon Subduing Masters Association. However, most of them were trained by Luo Su of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. In terms of cultivation, these 49 knights were not inferior to the carefully selected Frost Mirror cavalry generals. Moreover, their past experiences had given them a few more abilities than the Frost Mirror cavalry generals, who rarely moved around in the mountains. In terms of stealth, concealment, and tracking, even if the Frost Mirror cavalry generals had 10 times the number of them, they still wouldn't be able to compete with them in a battlefield that they were familiar with. Therefore, once the situation became chaotic, even if they ran into Shenlin Jun's reserve forces, about 80% of them could survive. If they were lucky, they might even be able to escape from the ambush site with a few survivors. However, Zhang Xiuzhu still needed time to come up with a general plan of action. Although some of the Frost Mirror cavalry generals had to return alive, who would live and who would die was still a matter of consideration. For example, Juechen, who was the messenger, would definitely take up one of the spots. The guy who was wearing an ordinary general's armor but was surrounded by several Frost Mirror cavalry generals probably had a powerful background as well. As for the rest of the spots, Zhang Xiuzhu would have to consider carefully. After all, although the idea of an ambush was proposed by the northern frontier, the scapegoat would definitely be the Shenlin Jun's reserve forces. Therefore, the more people from the Shuangjin dynasty survived, the more credible the rumor that Li Zhongxing spread would be. But similarly, if all the important people survived, and the ones who died were just cavalry generals, the Shuangjin dynasty would naturally become suspicious. They might even take this opportunity to launch a war directly to see the truth of the northern frontier. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu needed time and space to observe the situation and determine the status of the Frost Mirror cavalry generals so that he could decide who would survive. According to the plan, the ambushers should be Zhang Xiuzhu's own people who had seized equipment from Wei River City. However, for the sake of realism, once the two sides engaged in close combat, even their own people would not hold back. If they were unlucky or not strong enough, they would die in vain. War had always been this cruel. Moreover, no one knew when the ambush would begin. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu's team leader had to arrange everything properly before the ambush happened. For example, he had to arrange at least 3 or 4 people around the valuable Frost Mirror barbarian. Once the battle started and the situation was not good, they would immediately cover the enemy's retreat. After all, they were all on the same side. Once the battlefield was divided, the brothers would not die even if they were captured. In order to ensure the implementation of the plan, Zhang Xiuzhu had even prepared a plan to completely wipe out. Fortunately, the people he brought with him were all elites. They did not have any combat strength or reaction time problems. As long as Zhang Xiuzhu gave the order, or if things deviated from his expectations, they would be able to react immediately. For a scholarly general like Zhang Xiuzhu, he only needed to be a wise man. Naturally, they would carry out the plan in a way that maximized their benefits. It was just that with Keizhuo constantly chattering in his ear, not to mention that Zhang Xiuzhu's heart-nurturing kung fu had not yet reached the great accomplishment stage, even if he could reach the stage of being indifferent, it would still be difficult for him to ignore Keizhuo, who was like a fly. Helplessly, he could only give an officer next to him a look. Chapter 5:16. The latter immediately understood and welcomed him with a smile, young clan leader, please don't make things difficult for our team leader. He's still familiar with this area and we still need him to lead the way. If he gets distracted and takes the wrong path into the deep mountains and forests, we'll all become food for the demonic beasts. Besides, our leader doesn't speak the common language. We're the only ones who can communicate with him. If you have anything to say, why don't you tell me? I'll pass it on to both sides later. The officer quickly pulled Kai-Ting away from Zhang Shuzhu with a warm smile on his face. Never in his wildest dreams would Kai-Ting have imagined that this smiling fellow was actually one of the famous torturers of the Imperial Secret Service. Who knew how many skins he had personally peeled off, not to mention how proficient he was in other cruel methods of torture. But just this smile alone made Kai-Ting, whose heart was in turmoil, feel a deep sense of security. At this moment, the two of them were undoubtedly chatting happily, as if they were close friends who were talking and laughing as they walked further and further away. Zhang Xiaozhu looked at the backs of the two people as they disappeared into the distance. Then, he faintly sighed and said in his heart, "Why don't I just kill them? It's so annoying to always have a fly by my side." The group advanced for another 4 hours. They were less than half an hour away from the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment. However, Zhang Shuzhu, who was at the front of the group, suddenly raised his right hand. In that instant, whether it was the cavalry or the supply troops, they all stopped in their tracks and carefully drew their weapons. The Frost Mirror Cavalry, who was already suspicious of these northern frontier people, was shocked. They also drew their weapons. But the targets of the two sides were completely different. The northern frontier people were guarding the dense forest in front of them, while the Frost Mirror Cavalry were guarding against these people from the northern frontier. After a few breaths, the Frost Mirror Cavalry realized that the people from the northern frontier people weren't targeting them. But even though they were embarrassed, they didn't put down their weapons. They were still on high alert, as if they were worried that the people from the northern frontier people were putting on a show. They were waiting for them to lower their guard before attacking. "General, may I ask what's going on?" Kai-Ting whispered to a few of his trusted generals. Then, he rode to the front of the formation to ask about the situation. "There are no beasts in the forest. Even a startled bird wouldn't fall. What do you think is going on?" Zhang Xiaozhu glanced at Kai-Ting and said something in code, which the genial officer passed on to Kai-Ting. According to the original plan, there would be an ambush on the way. But the location of the ambush surprised Zhang Shuzhu. This place was only a few minutes away from the Shuangjin dynasty's military camp. As long as they passed through this dense forest, they would enter the open plains. Then, they would arrive at the place where the Frost Mirror Cavalry was gathered. If the commander of the Divine Forest Guard wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't have set up an ambush in such a place. After all, if the commotion caused by the battle had attracted the attention of the Frost Mirror Cavalry, these starving fellows would quickly realize that there were no armed forces from the northern region in this dense forest that blocked their path of retreat. It was just a little more troublesome to travel. After passing through this forest, they would be able to reach Eastwood City, and then return to the Frost Mirror Plains through the main road there. Letting the Frost Mirror Cavalry see a way out was a small matter. After all, most of the troops in the Northern Territory had gathered here, and the encampment wasn't too far away. If the Frost Mirror Cavalry gave up on their mobility and entered the forest, they would lose at least 40% of their men before they could make it to the other end of the forest. Furthermore, there was a group of troops from the Southern Army blocking their path. When the pursuers met up with the Southern Expedition, they would be able to surround the Frost Mirror Cavalry and take them down. The only thing they had to be careful about was that if the two groups of Frost Mirror Cavalry encountered each other, they could use their mobility advantage to surround the Frost Mirror Cavalry. It was hard to say whether the Frost Mirror Cavalry would be surrounded by the Northern Frontier or the Southern Expedition. Therefore, the ambush in front of them either had the confidence to take them down in an instant, or it was really an ambush. Moreover, it was an ambush that didn't know the current situation. Of course, the ambush wasn't the obedient rebel army of the aristocratic families punished by Li Zhongxing in the north. It was the real Shenlin Jun's reserve force. Although these guys ran out of Wei River City, they didn't take any supplies with them except for their armor and weapons. If it wasn't for the food stored in the underground tunnel, many of the hundreds of thousands of people would have starved to death. In any case, this show was most likely real. The camouflage troops had either been eliminated, or were waiting for their prey in a further place, or they had been set up by Li Zhongxing on their way back. It was just that this ambush was a little too amateurish. Not only did they clear the entire forest of wild beasts, they didn't even chase away the birds above them. Anyone who didn't know anything about the art of war or didn't pay attention to the details would definitely choose to go around this forest and choose another path. Were these guys really the elite Shenlin Jun's reserve force? Zhang Xiaozhu reached out and patted his forehead. His face was gloomy as he raised his right hand and gently pressed it forward twice. According to the organization of the northern region, a heavy wagon was equipped with 4 civilian laborers and 2 auxiliary soldiers whose fighting strength was not as good as the frontline troops. However, Li Zhongxing had long replaced the civilian laborers and the auxiliary soldiers with the good soldiers of the Southern Expedition Army who did not look like much. Now they had 85 generals with good fighting strength and 1,200 elite soldiers at their disposal. It sounded good, but if they really encountered the hundreds of thousands of Shenlin Jun's reserve force, it would be no different from delivering food to them. In fact, without the protection of seniors like the Fallen Star Army, Zhang Xiaozhu felt that even if they encountered a group of defeated soldiers, even if the difference in numbers between the two sides wasn't that big, their chances of winning were really low. After all, the ordinary soldiers of Shenlin Jun's reserve force were basically equal to most of the Frost warriors on the battlefield. The Northern Frontier's reserve force might have more elite soldiers, but the difference wasn't that big. As for the combat strength of those elite soldiers, in a battle of this level, it was almost negligible. Fortunately, not many people noticed that something was wrong. Following Zhang Xiaozhu's order, a group of 10 elite soldiers instantly broke away from the formation and entered the dense forest in front of them with swords and shields in their hands. Soon, they were blocked by the dense weeds and tree trunks. Zhang Xiaozhu turned his horse slightly, closed his eyes slightly, and began to count silently, 1, 2, 3. Chapter 5:17. 15 breaths. Zhang Xiaozhu's eyes suddenly widened. He raised his right hand and made a fist. The elite soldiers who received the order immediately overturned the supply wagons beside them. They used these not-so-sturdy wooden wagons to build a temporary and simple fortification. Then, they raised their swords and shields and hid behind the supply wagons. Zhang Xiaozhu and his brothers also dismounted and retreated to the back of the fortifications. Clearly, the Mount Frost generals weren't too happy about this. After all, they spent most of their time on horseback. If they dismounted and fought these northern frontier soldiers on foot, they wouldn't even be able to last one round. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape. On the other hand, Kei Tang, who had been whispering into Zhang Xiaozhu's ear, jumped down from her horse and hid behind the fortifications. Many Mount Frost generals rolled their eyes at her. Whoosh! 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 Before the Judgment Frost cavalry could reprimand them, the sharp sound of something tearing through the air rang out. Before the 34 Frost Mirror riders could react, 11 of them were shot down by the volley of arrows. The rest of them also had a few arrows stuck in their bodies. Although the arrows weren't fatal for a short period of time, they still affected their mobility. This volley of arrows had basically crippled half of the Frost Mirror Riders' combat strength. As for Zhang Xiaozhu and his party, who had long anticipated this, they were practically unscathed. Most of the arrows were nailed to the supply wagons, while a small number of arrows were blocked by the shields. Of course, there were a few unlucky fellows who were still hit by the arrows. Those who were slightly luckier were shot in the arms and calves, which affected their combat strength but wasn't fatal. Those who were unlucky had their heads cleanly shot by an arrow. This time, Zhang Xiuzhu and the others didn't need to waste any more words. The remaining Frost Mirror cavalry immediately dismounted from their horses, which they viewed as their lover, and scrambled into the fortifications of the supply wagons. They began to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves. The Mirror Frost dynasty only had two battle styles. The first was to use cavalry and archers to harass the enemy while slowly trailing behind them. The second was to directly charge forward with the army. They didn't care about losses and only wanted to engage in close combat with the enemy. Of course, aside from the boorish ones, the Mirror Frost generals who could make the latter battle strategy were basically all confident that they would win. Who are these guys? Kei Teng was trembling all over. His teeth chattered as he spoke. It was so loud that one would worry that he would bite his tongue. Zhang Xiuzhu's lips curled up. A bitter smile appeared on his face. He ordered in code, "Repair the fortification. Move the extra supply wagons to the front. We will wait for 1 or 2 more rounds of attack to see how strong the enemy is." To put it bluntly, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Everyone knew that during the time of the Wanjian dynasty, Lei Qiuxing, Yan Xingqi, and their personal guards were all elites in the world and were equally matched. In Lei Qiuxing's dynasty, after a few decades of development, the Divine Forest Army had become the #1 army in the Shenwu dynasty with the title of the world's #1 step, becoming a legend among legends. However, everyone in the northern frontier felt that Lei Qiuxing's era was about to end. A new era that belonged to Lin Yuan was about to begin. Shen Lin Jun, the world's #1 heavy infantry, should have retired from the stage. Who would become the first army in the northern frontier? This was the long-cherished wish of almost every soldier in the northern frontier. They had the northern frontier to defend, the southern frontier to attack, and the experienced and ruthless Star Fall. There were also the graduates of the Star General class that Lin Yuan personally led. It was said that they had formed a secret special unit that had yet to be officially revealed. The scale of the southern expedition was too large. Sooner or later, different units would be assigned to different territories. Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to work hard with Donglin City as his goal. Although his real opponent was the Shuangjin dynasty, this didn't stop Zhang Xiuzhu from having the idea of personally training his own troops as the northern frontier's #1 army. Most of the people in front of him now were Shen Lin Jun's reserves. If he didn't even have the guts to challenge the reserves, how could Zhang Xiuzhu still have the face to compete for the title of the northern frontier's #1 army? Even if his troops did become the strongest army in the northern frontier in the future, his concession to Shen Lin Jun's reserves today would fiercely nail him to the pillar of shame. Even if he obtained that title, he wouldn't dare to openly show it. Although most of the people present were not Zhang Xiuzhu's subordinates, they were at the top of the southern expedition's food chain. Naturally, they wouldn't have the idea of directly retreating after hearing the other party's name. Now that Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to stay and fight with the other party, for them, it was something they couldn't ask for more. The other party shouldn't have a lot of people. They are just a defeated army. Zhang Xiuzhu slightly raised his eyebrows and sneered. Although the ambush technique is lame, if it weren't for our quick reaction, they could have leisurely come up and killed us one by one. This level of attack isn't something that can be done by just anyone, so their identity is correct. The only thing that is wrong is the number of people. You mean, Officer Gung quickly took over the conversation, squinted his eyes and said, the other party deliberately covered up their marching tracks and scattered in the territory of the northern frontier. They just want us to focus on their original marching route. But in fact, the people who are still marching along their original marching route are almost all abandoned pawns. Zhang Xiuzhu nodded slightly and continued, also, if they have enough people, they should have come up to fight us at close range after seeing that we have finished building the fortifications and exposed their existence with the rain of arrows. But they haven't done anything yet. I think they are either the allies of the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalry, or they don't have enough people and don't have the confidence to fight us at close range. The rain of arrows just now came suddenly and uniformly. Zhang Xiuzhu only heard the loud sound of bowstrings being released. Obviously, these people had drawn their bows, pulled their strings, and released their bows at almost the same time, so the countless sounds converged into one loud sound. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. But Zhang Xiuzhu's command was good, and his subordinates reacted quickly. Even building the fortifications with local materials was only a matter of seconds. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. So even if the other party was Shenlin Jun's reserve force, they had no choice but to take Zhang Xiuzhu's army seriously. Chapter 5:18. Both sides have about the same number of people. We still don't know who will kill who. Geng Su was obviously not someone who was afraid of trouble. He immediately sneered, "How about we organize a counterattack? If they don't want to come out of the forest, we will rush in and play with them." Geng Su was a member of the Genie Guards. He was Yu Dingchen, the one who received the order from Li Zhong. After delivering Li Zhong's handwritten document to Li Zhongxing, Yu Dingchen didn't immediately return to the safe Shunning City. Instead, he chose to stay at the front line to help the southern expedition. Although the ones sent to occupy the source of Wei River were a few subdivisions of the southern expedition, it didn't mean that the main force didn't lack manpower. Based on the current tragic degree of one army against a country, Li Zhongxing's troops had to be at least 3 times more than before to have the capital to be strong. Zhang Xiuzhu gently shook his head and sighed. No matter what, the other side is the world's elite Shenlin Jun. Even if they are in the reserve force, they are not much weaker than us. If we rush in and fight with them, it won't be called a war. Speaking of this, Zhang Xiuzhuan paused and smiled bitterly. It's called delivering food. Yu Dingchen, who was originally calmed down by Zhang Xiuzhu, suddenly changed his expression. Even the hot blood in his chest cooled down a lot. Whether he admitted it or not, Zhang Xiuzhu's judgment was correct. After all, since ancient times, soldiers fought soldiers, generals fought generals. No one would give up the identity of a purple-level general to kill a small group of soldiers. In this case, the elite soldiers of the northern frontier were obviously not inferior to anyone. But only Shenlin Jun was outside of common sense. This army that was firmly controlled by Lei Chuxing recruited new soldiers every year. They were not selecting soldiers at all. Instead, they were selecting people who had the qualifications to become generals and bringing them back to Wei River City for training. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Shenlin Jun's reserve force was all generals. Not to mention their army, looking at the entire northern frontier, except for the 5,000-star Fallen Army, there was probably only the secret army formed by the star class that could win against Shenlin Jun's reserve force. After all, Shenlin Jun was selecting generals, but the star class selection of recruits was almost like selecting monsters. Zhang Xiuzhu, a scholarly general, could be regarded as a confidant and successor by Li Zhongxing after meeting Li Zhongxing face to face. Naturally, he had the ability. And he was only qualified to be invited to the star class for an interview. If he rejected it, then so be it. It was as if Lin Yuan had never cared about him. Although Li Zhongxing had the title of Southern Expedition General, in fact, he had only been brought out of Shenlin Jun's reserve force for a little more than a year. However, this did not mean that Li Zhongxing was a newcomer to the battlefield. On the contrary, with Luo Su's teaching and the process of fighting against various aristocratic families in the north, Li Zhongxing's growth speed could be said to be leaps and bounds. He quickly implemented the knowledge that he had learned in Wei River City. The current Li Zhongxing could not be said to be a famous general who could move unhindered in the world, but his level was not inferior to veteran generals who had fought hundreds of battles on the battlefield. Just based on this point, one could tell what kind of monsters were in the star class, not to mention those talented generals that Lin Yuan had focused on recruiting. Any one of them, after training for a period of time and turning their theoretical knowledge into experience, could be in existence that could lead a large army by themselves. We can't beat them, but that doesn't mean that I can't deal with them. My soldiers. Zhang Shuzhu leaned against the fortifications and roared in a low voice. The elite soldiers around instantly cast their gazes over. Zhang Shuzhu smiled and nodded, saying, "What you faced just now was not the aristocratic family's rebel army, not the roaming bandits of the forest, but the divine martial heavy steps, Shenlin Jun." Speaking up to this point, Zhang Shuzhu paused, and said with a bit of ridicule, "Of course, it's the reserve force. As the saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow." Shenlin Jun's name was well known throughout the world. Even the people of the northern frontier had heard of this invincible army that gathered the leaders of the Shenwu dynasty. If they were told that the ambush was Shenlin Jun, even if these elite soldiers had a strong sense of bravery in their hearts, they would not do something that would send them to their deaths. However, Zhang Shuzhu pointed out that the other party was a reserve force, and even used a ridiculing tone to speak, which immediately drove away the nervousness in the hearts of many people. After the surrounding atmosphere calmed down a little, Zhang Shuzhu continued, "Of course, Shenlin Jun has been an army for decades, and the requirements for recruiting soldiers are basically the king of soldiers or the talented orphans of the battlefield. However, my southern expedition has been an official army for less than half a year. Asking you to go and risk your lives is a bit too much." The corner of Yu Dingchen's mouth twitched crazily. Listening to the continuous roaring laughter, he felt that his whole body was not good. Is there anyone who can boost morale like this? Just come up and tell your own soldiers that you can't beat them at all. Then why are you still here? Isn't it better to escape early? But it's not that we don't have a chance of winning. Zhang Shuzhu's tone suddenly changed, and with a touch of the aura of a powerful army, he said in a deep voice, "We can't beat them, but you did a good job before." At this moment, Shenlin Jun probably thinks that our group is one of the best in the northern frontier, and that we might be on par with them. Therefore, after they took advantage of us with the rain of arrows, they don't dare to come out and fight with us. Team leader, what do you mean by win? A burly man slowly stood up and asked doubtfully, "We can't beat them in a fight. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that they are suspicious of us to retreat and stay here to wait for them to react?" Obviously, this man was a typical person who was frightened by Shenlin Jun's name. As soon as he heard that they were no match for Shenlin Jun, he immediately wanted to retreat. If it weren't for the fact that military orders were absolute, this man would have already started to run away. Therefore, when Zhang Shuzhu tried to boost morale, he took the initiative to stand up and try to persuade Zhang Shuzhu to withdraw the troops. Use your stupid brain and think about it. Shenlin Jun is hiding in the dense forest. They can see us, but we can't see them. Why didn't they take advantage of the long-range attack after they took advantage of us? Instead, why did they stay silent? Yu Dingchen angrily pointed at the burly man and sneered, "With this little ability, you still have the face to say that you are a graduate of the Northern Frontier Academy. I advise you to go back to the furnace as soon as possible. Don't disgrace the Northern Frontier soldiers." Chapter 5:19. Zhang Shuzhu slowly raised his right hand and pressed down Yu Dingchen's hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, that's a good question. If I want to win this war, I have to tell you what our chance of victory is. I also have to tell you why I'm so sure that we can win when I'm sure you're no match for them in a hand-to-hand combat." This time, even the burly man and Yu Dingchen looked at him with curiosity written all over their faces. First of all, although they are indeed elites who are stronger than us, they are still defeated soldiers in essence. If you've been praised as number one in the world for so many years and then suddenly got pulled down from your pedestal, your first reaction would be to fight with your life on the line. But if you can't beat them, you would feel sorry for yourself and feel that you don't deserve the title of number one in the world. If you meet someone who's not weak, you might not be able to win. Right now, the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces were in such a state of mind. Simply put, their confidence had already been shattered. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have this round of arrow rain. In the past, how could the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces put us, who had seen our banners, in their eyes? Second of all, although they seemed to have the upper hand, we didn't lose much of our main force. On the contrary, not long after they were defeated in Wei River City, their connection with the Central Plains was cut off by us. No matter how elite they are, as long as they can't cross the Wei River, they are like rootless duckweeds. Their arrows and rations are getting less and less because there are no lone troops on this plain. They are either hordes of demon beasts or demi-human troops, a large number of auxiliary troops from my southern expedition, or the fallen star army that broke their mentality. Therefore, they can't get any supplies at all. Of course, you may ask me why they don't bully the Shuangjin barbarian. In fact, the answer is very simple. Because the Shuangjin barbarian are now poorer and more miserable than them. At least there are some supplies stored in the Wei River City tunnels for them to maintain. But what can the Shuangjin barbarian eat after their rations and horses? They were so hungry that they wanted to eat people. Thirdly, based on the above situation, Shenlin Jun's reserve force is currently using the tactic of breaking up the entire force and trying to infiltrate all parts of the northern frontier territory. They are waiting for the Shenwu dynasty to use them in the future. However, the northern frontier territory is currently being cleaned up and all the resources have been moved to the hinterland of the northern frontier. The Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion is in charge of the distribution of the resources, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is personally escorting them. Therefore, it is a complete joke for them to try to infiltrate the place. I know, you guys don't know why I want you to bury the pot and cook. Actually, I don't want to explain it. Zhang Shuzhu watched the troops begin to prepare, then he smiled and said, but just in case, I advise you guys to use this time to adjust the crossbows and familiarize yourself with the swords. Otherwise, when those guys rush out later, you guys won't even be able to withstand the first round. Those Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers inside don't know when the last time they had a proper meal is. If we cook here, once the aroma spreads out, it would be strange if they obediently watch. Awesome team. After a short moment of silence, a young soldier suddenly yelled out. Even if they were on the plains, they might not be able to beat him, let alone in the dense forest with complicated terrain. These Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers had been on guard for the past 2 days. Zhang Shuzhu really didn't have the confidence to take down this tough bone. After all, they were a group of elite soldiers. If they only relied on the geographical advantage of the dense forest to defend themselves, even if Li Zhongxing and his personal guards came over, there was no way they could win this battle. However, these Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers didn't attack them because they hated the people from the northern frontier. From the very beginning, their goal was to escort this batch of supplies. After all, the transport team of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't something that a group of defeated soldiers could challenge in terms of size and strength. Therefore, the Frost Mirror Cavalry wasn't the only ones who couldn't get supplies. Chapter 520. The supply troops brought back 2 bags of food that were scattered outside the attack range of the forest. They quickly started cooking. However, the rest of the troops didn't chat like they usually did when they were waiting for their meals. Instead, they silently used whetstones to test the sharpness of their weapons. A group of soldiers with strange crossbows were squatting behind the simple fortifications. They were all listening to the movements on the other side of the fortifications. To them, the enemy that attacked first was nothing but prey. "Brother Yu, what did your team leader say?" Tang, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, turned his head and asked Yu Dingchen. His face was pale from fear. He didn't know who the ambushers in the forest were, but they definitely weren't the Frost Mirror cavalry. The arrows they used weren't the arrows of the Frost Mirror grassland. Even if the Frost Mirror cavalry were starving, they wouldn't attack their own people. "Our commander said that there's a group of troublesome enemies hiding in the forest ahead. If we rush in and engage them in hand-to-hand combat, we'll lose without a doubt." Yu Dingchen chewed on the jerky in his hand as he spoke slowly. "But their target is our supplies. If we start cooking here, they'll take the risk and rush out of the forest to attack us. At that time, we can rely on the fortifications to kill them one by one." The reason Yu Dingchen was eating jerky wasn't because he had the privilege of an officer. It was because 500 of them, including him, were chosen to be Shenlin Jun's reserve troops. They were the last line of defense near the fortifications. Once that happened, they had to rush out and engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat to buy time and space for the archers behind them to kill the enemy. "Then, did your team leader say who the other party was?" Tang looked at the jerky in Yu Dingchen's hand and swallowed his saliva as he asked in a low voice. Because Zhang Xiuzhu was a meticulous person, he always remembered what his persona was. Even when he was trying to boost morale, he was still using the code words of the Northern Frontier Army. Therefore, from what Tang heard, the mute general was constantly telling his troops unknown numbers, and yet he was still able to stir up everyone's emotions. That was why Tang asked this question out of curiosity. It wasn't that he hadn't thought that the enemy in the forest was the army of the northern region, but Zhang Xiuzhu and his men had reacted too quickly. The sentries who had gone into the forest to scout the situation hadn't even come out in a dozen breaths. They had immediately overturned the supply wagons and withstood the first salvo. Tang did not believe that this was Zhang Xiuzhu's prediction. After all, if such an outstanding general was placed in the Shuangjin dynasty, he would at least be a major commander who commanded tens of thousands of cavalry. He would not be a direct subordinate of only 5 people. All of this seemed like a script that the northern frontier had prepared in advance. But after giving it some thought, Tang felt that this wasn't the case. If the Northern Territory wanted to send people to disguise themselves as other troops to ambush and kill, they would first have to let these people see the other party's armor or identification. Then, while they were charging in, they would also make sure to leave behind some of the more important people among them as witnesses to report back to the Empire. This would infuriate the Reflection Frost dynasty. However, the enemy had no intention of showing up until now. Moreover, the previous attacks had no intention of leaving anyone alive. The only reason they were able to survive the first round of attacks was because of their cultivation and riding skills. After dodging the scythe of the Grim Reaper, they were able to roll and crawl behind the temporary fortifications. Pfft, Yu Dingchen sneered and narrowed his eyes. The Shuangjin dynasty might not have many spies, but that doesn't mean they don't know anything about the Frost Mirror Plains, right? Young clan leader, how many troops do you think there are in the north that can be considered troublesome to deal with? Aside from the Shuangjin dynasty's Blood Liao Knights, the only force that could influence the north was Shenlin Jun. Thinking of this, Tang's lips trembled. He whispered, "Are you guys crazy? How dare we challenge Shenlin Jun with just the few of us? No wonder your team leaders said that if we fought hand to hand, you would lose without a doubt." At this point, Tang's expression changed slightly and he continued, "Also, if it really is the Divine Forest Army, your crossbow bolts may not be able to penetrate their armor. Fighting a positional battle is only delaying them a little. If this continues, we will all die." Yu Dingchen shook his head and smiled. "What Shenlin Jun? They are just a bunch of defeated soldiers who have abandoned their armor. Not to mention that their armor might not be useful, even if it could block our arrows, they wouldn't have the guts to wear it. After all, the Divine Forest Army's reserve force had already been crushed by Gao Jia. The group of soldiers who had escaped were already in a state of panic. When the army couldn't afford to feed so many people, not only would they be chased out of the group, even the armor or training uniform that could prove their identity would be taken away. If the defeated soldiers were to flee in the north, they would encounter the Northern Frontier Army sooner or later. If a few powerful characters appeared, it would be easy for them to calculate the movement path of the defeated soldiers based on where they appeared. Then, they would be able to annihilate them. As a precaution, when the defeated soldiers were kicked out of the group, everything that could prove their identity would be taken away. When a tiger lost its claws and teeth, and an elephant lost its skin, these so-called fierce beasts, what was there to be afraid of? At this point, Yu Dingchen raised the jerky in his hand and said with a smile, "There's also this food. After eating it, you'll have to rush out and engage in close combat with the enemy when they're close enough to buy time for the archers behind. I see that you have been staring at it, do you want to eat?" Keijua's expression changed slightly. While he grew up in a harsh environment like the Frost Mirror grassland and was at the pinnacle of the airborne realm, as the young chief of the Green Fish tribe, how much danger could he have encountered? Many years of living like a prince had long since wiped away the courage in Keijua's body, and what little courage he had left was not enough to support his courage to charge out and engage in close combat with the enemy after knowing the identity of the enemy. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, Keijua shook his head very calmly. It was obvious that he had overcome his appetite. They were all elite soldiers, so they carried out orders very quickly. It didn't take long for the aroma of the stewed rice to spread. Not only did it spread to the jungle, but even the simple fortifications had many people drooling. However, everyone knew that the cooking was just to lure the enemy out. At the very least, they had to wait until the upcoming battle was over before they could enjoy the meal. Chapter 521. About 500 miles away from the fortifications. Xiao An, who had tied his long blonde hair behind his head, leaned against a tree trunk next to him and raised his hand to signal for them to stop. Nearly 5,000 tree elves quickly stopped and squatted on the tree trunks, clenching the black composite bows in their hands. Further away, nearly 10,000 soldiers riding various Yao beasts also put on their helmets and faceplates again, clenching their spears and halberds, waiting for Commander Xiao An's next order. They were the demi-human troops under Xiao An's direct command. Although they were not counted as part of the army of the northern frontier, their contribution in this war was not small. Once the war was over, they could quickly get rid of their temporary status and become the first regular army composed of demi-humans in the nominally human-led forces. They would no longer be the slave soldiers and cannon fodder they used to be. For the entire demi-human race, this change was obviously rare and commendable. It was worth it for them to risk their lives for it. Lin Yuan's voice slowly sounded in their minds. 500 miles ahead, a southern expedition is preparing for battle. Quickly move to the battlefield and prepare for support. But remember, this battle does not belong to your troops. Unless your allies are about to be wiped out, you and your subordinates are not allowed to intervene. Yes. Xiao An cupped his hands toward the void in front of him, a touch of excitement appearing on his cold face. Their original mission was to wander between the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment and Eastwood City. They were supposed to kill the reservists of the Divine Forest Army and the exiles of the Frost Mirror Cavalry to ensure that these people would not affect Eastwood City's Great Wall plan. But this time, Lin Yuan personally gave the order, which meant that they could end this boring and tedious work. They could soon enter the battlefield and prove to the human soldiers that their demi-human army was also powerful. Everyone, stay hidden and follow me. Remember, don't attack without my order. Xiao An waved his hand and gave a few instructions to the subordinates around him. Soon, a herald flew out with a flag signal. This war machine composed of more than 10,000 demi-humans was once again in operation. In Shunning City. Ding Zai stood beside Lin Yuan with a smile and said in a deep voice, "Lord Dragon King is indeed an ambitious and ruthless man, playing the Shuangjian dynasty and Shenwu dynasty in the palm of your hand. Every move of yours is like a calm chess player, precise, deadly, and elegant. Stop your flattery." Li Zhong, who was sitting on the throne, interrupted Ding Zai's flattery and sneered, "I heard that Shanglu Association is very dissatisfied with a subordinate like you who played a good hand so badly. Originally, they wanted to execute you, but seeing that you still worked hard, they sent you on another mission to atone for your crimes. I think your mission isn't to come to the northern frontier to flatter our Dragon King, right?" Lin Yuan also coldly glanced at Ding Zai. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was very clear, carrying a bit of warning. Ding Zai's face slightly stiffened. He looked at Li Zhong with some fear, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Shanglu Association was a top faction after all. Their every move was hidden in the inner layer of the world. Even if they were doing something, countless people would use superficial skills to cover it up. If it wasn't for internal members leaking information, outsiders would definitely not know about Shanglu Association's actions. Now that Li Zhong had seen through his disguise so easily, it was obvious that he had received some information in advance. Either the Shifter Emperor Association spies had already infiltrated Shanglu Association, and their status shouldn't be low. Otherwise, they wouldn't know about the higher-ups' opinions on how to deal with him. Or, there were people in Shanglu Association who wished for Ding Zai's death. Before he arrived at the northern frontier, they had already leaked information to the northern frontier, letting Lin Yuan and Li Zhong know that he came with a mission that he had to complete. Because of this, they would have a bad impression of him. At the very least, all the channels of persuasion and flattery to repair the relationship between the two sides were blocked. Is Shanglu Association dissatisfied with this king's division of benefits, or? Lin Yuan finally opened his mouth, and there was some indifference in his tone. He wasn't afraid that Shanglu Association would fall out with him. After all, he wasn't strong enough. In this incident, he was only playing the role of cutting the cake. He didn't even eat much of the cake. All he could do was lick the cream on his knife. If Shanglu Association wasn't satisfied with this division of benefits, then they wouldn't be challenging Lin Yuan. Instead, they would be challenging the huge interest group formed by the other top factions. In the face of such a level of power, even if Shanglu Association was a top faction, it was just a building that could be crushed at any time. Ding Zai shook his head lightly and sneered. "Dragon King, you are overthinking. Although I am indeed here with a mission, this matter won't affect you or me. In fact, it is an enemy that you have to face. By informing you in advance, I am doing your northern frontier a huge favor. It will prevent you from being overwhelmed." Speaking up to this point, Ding Zai cast a sidelong glance at Li Zhong. The sneer on his face deepened. "I originally wanted to repair the relationship between the two sides. After all, I am a vice president of the Association of the Demon Arch. If I could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon Arch, then I would have more authority in Shanglu Association. In some decisions, would naturally be more biased towards the northern frontier. Unfortunately, it seems like I was overthinking." Lin Yuan and Li Zhong both looked at Ding Zai with indifferent expressions. They didn't seem to be moved at all. Among the three people present, which one of them wasn't a demon? If Ding Zai could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon Arch, he would indeed be biased towards them in Shanglu Association's decisions regarding the northern frontier. However, that was only because with a powerful association of the Demon Arch, Ding Zai's power would be greater. Both sides were in a relationship of mutual benefit and prosperity. It wasn't like Ding Zai's tone sounded like he was only looking out for the northern frontier. Ahem, then I will be direct. This time, I came to the northern frontier to inform you of the news. It is Lei Chuxing's trump card. Because you, Lin Yuan, had previously led the evil sect members to the south, Lei Chuxing had found a very suitable target to push the blame to. As such, we can no longer intervene. This matter can also be said to be you lifting a rock and smashing it on your own feet. Therefore, before the northern frontier is destroyed and things become completely out of control, we will not directly intervene. Ding Zai cleared his throat. Clearly, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan and Li Zhong didn't have any intention of giving him a way out. With resentment in his heart, Ding Zai didn't even use honorifics. Looking at Lin Yuan and Li Zhong, there was even a hint of pity in his eyes. Don't talk nonsense. Li Zhong's face darkened as he growled in a low voice. Chapter 522. The reason why Lei Chuxing dared to tear the Xinwu dynasty apart is actually very simple. It's because his trump card isn't an army or powerful cultivators. It's because he obtained support that he shouldn't have. With their existence, let alone the Xinwu dynasty, it's not impossible for him to sweep through the world if we don't interfere. The Dragon King is in existence from the ancient demon court. I think in the documents you obtained, there should be something called the Sky Demon recorded. It is the same as the Dragon race and the Kirin race today, an existence from the other side of the Celestial Gate. And unlike the former, these Sky Demons do not have any goodwill towards us. In their eyes, all living things are just food. Lei Chuxing's trump card is that he has a relationship with a terrifying Sky Demon. When necessary, as long as Lei Chuxing can give enough sacrifices, he can summon a group of powerful Sky Demons to fight for him. And during this period of war, countless souls have become sacrifices for Lei Chuxing to please the Sky Demon. In other words, he does not need to make any preparations to pull in the Sky Demon army in the south. After these Sky Demons eat all the living things in the south, they will regain part of their rationality. In this way, Lei Chuxing can command the Sky Demon army through that powerful existence. For example, he can let them bypass the central plains and attack the northern frontier, Frost Mirror, and Xinjiang. Ding Zai shook his head and smiled bitterly. In order to shut our mouths, Lei Chuxing pushed this matter to the evil cult in the south and pointed the reason for the evil cult entering the south to you. Therefore, it is not good for us to interfere. In addition, you are the successor of the demon court, so you naturally have the obligation to deal with these dirty guys. So, Li Zhong digested the information and said with a dark face, because you are afraid of trouble, you decided to let us fight with Lei Chuxing. To put it bluntly, that is indeed the case. Ding Zai put his hands behind his back and said in a deep voice, in our original plan, once Lei Chuxing is forced into a corner, he will naturally summon the Sky Demon army. At that time, we can legitimately interfere and directly wipe out the Sky Demon and Lei Chuxing. But now, according to the higher-ups, you caused the trouble, so you have to deal with it yourselves. At this point, Ding Zai paused. Seeing that the man and the Sky Demon had no intention of acting up, he continued, of course, we will support them from the outside. The chaos of the Sky Demon can only occur in the Xinwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier is destroyed, or the Sky Demon leave the Xinwu dynasty's territory, we will immediately eliminate them. Ding Zai's meaning was that the life and death of the northern frontier had nothing to do with them. When he finished speaking, Ding Zai had already planned to leave. After all, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong did not give him any face. Right now, he could not wait for the northern frontier to be destroyed, so that he could wash away the humiliation on his body. If you walk out like that, I can guarantee that even if I don't do anything to you, the Upper Deer Association will destroy your soul. Lin Yuan's voice suddenly sounded behind Ding Zai. Ding Zai's movements paused slightly, a layer of cold sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. This was because the term soul dispersing did not belong to the Sky Martial Continent. It was the highest punishment that the top powers would use to deal with their enemies, traitors, and trash. Once someone was included in this list, even their soul would be completely destroyed. Although Lin Yuan could tell from his innate ability to summon the nether realm's black water that there was no underworld in this world, there was still a law that guided the souls and the dead in this world to reincarnate. And from the fact that there were no demons and monsters in this world, this law was much more effective than the so-called underworld. Once the soul was destroyed, it was equivalent to being completely erased from this world. It would be impossible to reincarnate or become a Yin spirit. It was a punishment that was even more severe than death. The Upper Deer Association also benefits from this, so it's not good for us to directly interfere. It doesn't mean that we won't interfere. If you refuse to carry out the mission given by the higher-ups, you will die a horrible death, and even your soul will not be able to escape. Lin Yuan's voice sounded again, like the whispers of a demon from the underworld lying on a human's shoulder. Ding Zai turned around and was about to speak when Lin Yuan interrupted him again. I have the means to deal with the Sky Demon, so I don't need you to provide me with the weapons needed to kill the Sky Demon. But after destroying the Sky Demon's body, my army must have the demon-suppressing weapon to ensure that all the dead Sky Demons will be captured and brought to me. According to the inheritance of the underwater secret realm, the Sky Demon was actually a spiritual body similar to a ghost. They could invade other worlds at will, but they did not have a physical body. They could only use the method of seducing life forms to possess them. Then, they would fulfill the desires of the possessed person and devour the other person's soul. After achieving their goal of taking over the other person's nest, they would become a real threat to the creatures of this world. Of course, the Sky Demon needed time to nourish his body and recover his strength. He could not possess just anyone he saw. Only those with strong resentment, hatred, and other negative emotions would become the target of his seduction. Neutral and peaceful creatures would not be able to sense the existence of the Sky Demon at all. This was an extremely troublesome thing, but it was also extremely easy to deal with. For example, the current citizens of the northern frontier were much happier than before. Naturally, they were in good shape and would not give the Sky Demon any chance to take advantage of them. Thus, in theory, as long as all the creatures in the territory were happy, the Sky Demon would never breed. However, for the Shenwu dynasty, the continuous battles and hopeless predicament caused the citizens of the Shenwu dynasty to develop a large number of negative emotions. This could be said to be a breeding ground for the Sky Demon. The most troublesome thing about the Sky Demon was that they were spiritual bodies. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they would not die. At most, their minds would be injured and they would transform into formless objects to escape. After a period of time, they would possess a new physical body and become a new Sky Demon warrior. However, it was obvious that not everyone had a way to see and attack spiritual bodies. If they did not have the demon-suppressing weapon developed by the Heavenly Gate Guardian, these Sky Demon warriors would not be destroyed even if they died 100 times. They would be able to wear down the citizens of the northern frontier. What was even more frightening was that once they fell into a quagmire of war that they could not see any hope of winning, the citizens of the northern frontier would develop all sorts of negative emotions. In the timeline of the Tianwu continent, who knew how many powerful forces had been destroyed because of the Sky Demon that could not be killed? However, Lin Yuan's nether realm black water could be said to be the nemesis of the Sky Demon. The more Sky Demon he pulled in, the more powerful Lin Yuan's natural endowments would be. However, it was obvious that he could not appear anywhere in the northern frontier at any time. It was even more impossible for him to deal with the Sky Demon army that was attacking from all sides. Chapter 523. This condition is acceptable, but the Deer Association's ability is limited. We can't equip all your troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Even if we join forces with the other top factions, we can only equip every 5,000 troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Ding Zai spread out his hands and frowned. Lei Chuxing summoning the Sky Demon Army is just a small matter to the entire Sky Martial continent. The enemy we have to face is even more ferocious, and even if we have extra demon-suppressing artifacts, we can use them to replace the damaged ones at any time. Yes. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. An enemy that could pin down all the top experts of the Sky Martial continent was indeed terrifying. Even the current Lin Yuan felt a headache when facing the Sky Demon Army, but these top forces had to face opponents that were even more ferocious and powerful than the Sky Demon. At the same time, they had to deploy a portion of their people to monitor the entire Sky Martial continent at all times to prevent the enemy from stabbing them in the back. Including the demon-suppressing artifacts and the inherited memories, as well as the information about the world on the other side of the Heaven Gate, they were not created out of thin air. Countless creatures had paid the price of blood to accumulate this information bit by bit. It was also because of this unyielding spirit and sacrifice that the Sky Martial continent was able to maintain its current prosperous and peaceful appearance. The history of the creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate tens of thousands of years ago had already been sealed in the long river of history by all the top forces. Unless one reached a certain realm or had an ancient inheritance, they would not be able to obtain any information. However, Ding Zai's gaze paused on Lin Yuan for a moment, and his tone became respectful again. You said that you have a way to deal with the Sky Demon. Do you mean to seal them, or... The Sky Demon was a large race of creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate. Their fighting strength was not considered strong, and because they had an almost unlimited lifespan, the Sky Demon's cultivation speed was also abnormally slow. Other than under certain circumstances, if a Sky Demon wanted to directly affect the material world, they still needed a physical body. The stronger the Sky Demon, the higher the aptitude of the physical body, and the longer the time needed to recover their strength. However, the Sky Demon had no qualms about invading the Sky Martial continent because the cultivators of the Sky Martial continent did not have the ability to kill them. Even if they managed to find a devil-suppressing artifact that could seal the Sky Demon's spiritual body, the cultivators of the Martial Heaven continent could only bury the devil-suppressing artifact in some forbidden areas and then set up all kinds of traps and formations to ensure that no living beings would approach. Releasing the Sky Demon was just a way to imprison him. These sealed Sky Demons were still a huge threat because the Sky Demons could sense each other. Once a Sky Demon broke through the defenses set up by the cultivators, it would be very easy for the sealed Sky Demon to be released. Such cases were not rare. You can say that I killed him. Lin Yuan's different-colored eyes curved slightly, like a pair of crescent moons. He said calmly, they will exist in another form, but they will not casually threaten the living beings of the Sky Martial continent. Furthermore, the other Sky Demon will not be able to find them. Even if they find them, they will be treated as enemies. Was there a better method to deal with the Sky Demon than the sticks? As long as they dared to face Lin Yuan head-on, however many Sky Demons there were, they would be able to devour as many Sky Demons as there were. Lin Yuan's nether realm's black water would become longer and wider because of this. The Sky Demon that was pulled into the nether realm's black water would not die, but they would become Lin Yuan's most loyal warriors. Even if they encountered their own kind, they would be pulled into the nether realm's black water to accompany them. Then, let's wait and see. Ding Zai bowed slightly to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, we have sealed many Sky Demon all these years, but we have never been able to completely kill them. In recent years, due to the deaths of some powerful beings and the extinction of their forces, some ancient forbidden areas have already lost control. We suspect that the powerful Sky Demon that Lei Chuxing contacted is most likely an ancient Sky Demon that broke out of the seal. Be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, Ding Zai left King Shunning's residence and quickly headed south. Li Zhong walked behind Lin Yuan and asked with a frown, Dragon King, do you think this person's words can be trusted? Li Zhong was born in a poor family, and there were no outstanding cultivators among his ancestors. In addition, all the top forces had joined hands to create an information blockade. If he was not loyal to Lin Yuan, he would never have come into contact with these things. If he came into contact with them, it would mean that the Sky Martial Continent was finished. Therefore, Li Zhong would not express his own opinion on this matter, because an outsider was an outsider. Every word he said could affect Lin Yuan to make the wrong decision. Therefore, he could only remind Lin Yuan that Ding Zai was not trustworthy. Even if both sides were using each other, they had to be on guard in advance to avoid falling into the trap of others. 70% true, 30% false. Lin Yuan's smiling eyes returned to normal. He asked, "Is there any news from the south?" Li Zhong nodded slightly. After hesitating for a while, he frowned and said, "Qin Yu sent a message saying that a new force has appeared in the south. It seems to be called Jade Lake Immortal Palace. After investigation, it is confirmed that this Jade Lake Immortal Palace has released a kind of immortal elixir called Jade Lake Immortal Elixir. It is said that after persuading, one can leave their physical body and become an immortal. Then the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will provide a new young physical body for the immortal, helping them break free from the shackles of their lifespan. Do you believe it?" Lin Yuan's voice contained a bit of a smile, but his expression did not change in the slightest. Li Zhong did not hesitate this time. He shook his head decisively and said in a cold voice, "There is no such thing as a free benefit in this world. I heard that the Jade Lake Immortal Palace does not take any benefits and gives the so-called immortal elixir to the cultivators who come to their door for free. Anyone with a bit of brain knows that this is a huge trap. Being able to let cultivators break free from their physical body that was about to decay due to the end of their lifespan and change into a new physical body to move about in the world was something that all cultivators dreamed of. After all, even the Imperial Sky Realm to the Heaven Star Realm could be said to be one step at a time. There were many cultivators who were stuck at a bottleneck and died. Even Beast Lord Kirin, who was said to be at the peak of the mortal world, was like this, not to mention other people with mediocre talent. If one could obtain an immortal lifespan, then there would be more possibilities. Perhaps one could really break into the next realm. But there was such a good thing that could be enjoyed without paying any price. Only those who were about to die and were unwilling to die and those brainless idiots would believe it. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.